How many times do I have to say it for you to understand? You think your street monkey troupe is worthy of being called an opera troupe? Don't think that you can call it an opera just by standing on stage and screaming. The reputation of opera has been ruined by you. Get the hell out of here right now. Otherwise, I'll personally cut you up. I think you need to be taught a lesson. A series of banging sounds came from inside the door, accompanied by a few muffled groans. The rotten wooden door was knocked open with a bang, and a fat man with blood all over his face staggered out. He mumbled a few words and then rolled and crawled away. Inside the door stood a petite girl in a black Lolita dress. She had her hands on her hips, and her green hair stood up like a little lioness. Outside the door, Meg and his daughter stared at her with their mouths agape. The decaying wooden door swayed in the cold wind before finally collapsing to the ground. As for the girl inside the door, her green hair slowly fell to the ground. Her red eyes, which were shining with a fierce light, gradually became clear and bright. Her imposing manner was greatly reduced. Sigh, sigh, sigh. The girl looked at the middle-aged fat man's disappearing figure with a vexed expression. Then, her gaze landed on the three people standing at the door. She suddenly realized something, and her face turned red. She smiled at them awkwardly and said in a gentle voice, "Sorry, did I scare you?" That gentle tone, that gentle voice, and that natural and unpretentious attitude. She was completely like a cute big sister, okay? Although she was less than 1.5 meters tall and had an A rating, she was still unrivaled in her cuteness. It was impossible to associate her with the lion-like, middle-aged fat man who was 1.9 meters tall and the domineering female group leader who defended her dreams and career. Is this acting? I love it. Meg couldn't help but look at the girl in front of him in a new light. The perfect combination of the irascible queen and the gentle big sister. Normal men couldn't understand this kind of beauty. We're here to watch the opera. Meg pointed at the plaque that had fallen to the ground. Oh, Vicky was shocked. She hurriedly pulled the plaque out from under the door and patted the dust off it like it was a treasure. Only then did she come back to her senses and look at Meg. You said you're here to watch the opera? Yes. Meg looked at Vicky, who was holding the plaque like it was a treasure, and nodded with a smile. We're in the right place, right? Of course. This is the Black Cat Song Troupe. Vicky nodded quickly with a smile on her face. However, she looked at the door lying on the ground and said a little embarrassedly, just now. It was a little unexpected, but our performance definitely won't disappoint you. I hope so. Meg nodded and followed Vicky into the dilapidated farmyard. The yard was very desolate, but it was very clean. A small wooden platform was put together in the middle of the yard, and it looked very shabby. In front of the wooden platform, there were a few shabby chairs, and there were also signs of poor maintenance. This should be the so-called Black Cat open-air theater. Please take a seat. The opera is about to start. Vicky's face was slightly red as she led the three of them to their seats. This was the first wave of guests who didn't immediately turn around and leave after entering the theater in half a month. A few young heads popped out from the side of the room and looked at Meg and his father with curiosity and excitement, as if they were opera performers. You don't have to take care of us. Meg glanced at the legs of the chair that were tied up with strips of cloth and was a little worried that they wouldn't be able to withstand his slightly forceful expression. Amy had already taken out her folding stool, and as a consumable, she very cleverly learned from her mother and prepared a few more. Therefore, Meg and also sat down on the safety of their own stool. Vicky's expression was slightly awkward, but she was also quite excited. At least there were guests sitting down, which was a good sign. Please wait a moment. Vicky quickly walked toward the actors' lounge. This leader doesn't seem very smart. Isn't she going to take away the tickets first? Meg looked at Vicky's back and frowned slightly. Chapter 21:31. Leader, are these three people here to listen to the opera? This is the first time someone has sat down in half a month, isn't it? That's great. Our Black Cat Song Troupe's chance to shine and make a name for ourselves is here. As soon as Vicky walked in, the opera troupe members gathered around her excitedly. During this period of time, they had been treated coldly like never before. Their enthusiasm was almost wiped out by the cold wind and loneliness outside. All right, everyone, get ready to perform on stage. This kind of opportunity doesn't come by every day. If this performance is successful, maybe this guest will bring us new guests. Vicky could not hide the excitement on her face. Leader, have you collected the tickets? At this moment, an old voice suddenly sounded from the corner. The smiles on everyone's faces froze, and they all looked at Vicky. Vicky's expression also stiffened. She looked a little embarrassed and blushed. Shaking her head, she said, "Not yet, sigh." Everyone sighed. It seemed that this was not the first time something like this had happened. Leader, we haven't had any income for half a month. If this goes on, everyone will really starve to death. A troop member looked at Vicky helplessly and said, "Rumble." Someone's stomach made a series of sounds in response. Everyone could not hide the worry on their faces. That's enough. Shut up, all of you. Vicky's aura suddenly changed. Her red eyes swept across the crowd like a king examining his subjects. She said in a low voice, "A good opera singer will never worry about food. As long as you perform well and show your strength and state, no one will be short of the ticket price, unless they don't want to step out of this courtyard." Everyone immediately fell silent and began to prepare to go on stage. Meg and the two little guys were sitting in the courtyard in the bitterly cold wind. They had already taken out small blankets and wrapped themselves in them. The small blankets finally came in handy, but they did not expect that this time it was not for sleeping, but to keep out the cold. Even for an amateur like Meg, it was the first time that he had participated in an open-air opera that had its own bench and blankets. When the actors of the Black Cat Song Troupe came out one after another, they were all stunned when they saw the three people sitting on small chairs, wrapped in small blankets, and warming themselves by a fire. A little weird and a little cute, especially the two little girls, one big and one small, who were wrapped in a small blanket and stuck out their small heads. They looked exquisite and cute, and their silly and adorable looks were simply too adorable. Ahem. Vicky coughed lightly, reminding her team members to act more professionally. It had been too long since he had seen the audience, so the audience seemed to be more curious. This made him seem unprofessional. The actors hurriedly retracted their gazes and went up the stage one after another. They began their performance. Meg glanced around. This was a small opera troupe with only 16 people. There were 3 musicians and there were actors of all ages. They all looked sallow and emaciated, and their steps were unsteady. It seemed that it was not easy to be an artist. The opera was called Miss Black Cat. The troupe was called the Black Cat Song Troupe, and the play was called Miss Black Cat. For a small opera troupe that had just started, it was quite smart. If the opera became popular, their opera troupe would also take off. Hacker. The performance began. Without the accompaniment of a large band, the atmosphere was slightly lacking. But to Meg's surprise, this opera troupe's performance was actually quite good. Their sallow and emaciated appearance did not cover up their solid singing and acting skills. Their rich and melodious voices were far beyond the limitations of the wasteland stage. Miss Black Cat told the story of a young lady from a big family. In order to break free from the shackles of the world, she kept fighting and finally left the big family. She gained freedom and a new life, and finally, she gained love and a career. It was a very cliché and simple story, but the performance of the opera actors was full of tension and could really arouse the emotions of the audience. What surprised Meg the most was the actress of Miss Black Cat, Vicky. This petite troupe leader had a shocking soprano, and her control of her voice was amazing. She was several levels above the other actors. He finally understood why Vicky was able to become the troupe leader. She had outstanding strength, excellent acting skills, and was able to attack and defend. Ordinary people could not beat her. The 2 little ones were also watching with great interest. Although they were wrapped in a small blanket and warmed by the fire, they did not feel sleepy at all. "Father, what song is Miss Black Cat singing? Why can't I understand it?" Amy asked curiously. At this moment, Vicky was singing a low and sad song in a language that Meg had never heard before. Meg listened carefully for a while. The system did not translate any useful words, but He vaguely felt that the tone was a little familiar. I don't know. Maybe it's a dialect from somewhere. Meg shook his head slightly. Although the language was incomprehensible, emotions could be conveyed through singing. This Miss Black Cat opera, under the passionate performance of Vicky and the other actors, achieved an effect that far exceeded Meg's expectations. Vicky's professionalism had even surpassed the lead actors of several operas that Meg had seen in his previous life. She was definitely at the level of a professional opera actor. But opera was still in its infancy in this world. How could there be such an outstanding opera troupe leader? Could it be that she was a legendary genius? Or was she a transmigrator like him? Meg's curiosity was successfully piqued. The performance ended. Meg, Amy, and Anne stood up and applauded to show their appreciation for the opera performance, and wiped the corners of her eyes. It was obvious that the little one liked the story very much. Thank you. Vicky bowed to the curtain call with the actors. From their faces, it was obvious that they were in a very good mood. To be able to receive the applause and appreciation of the audience was a great honor for an opera actor. It was also their motivation to persevere. Can I draw the stories? Anne turned to look at Meg and gestured with her hands. We need to ask Miss Black Cat's opinion. After all, this is her story. Meg smiled as he looked at Vicky, who was walking towards them. I can help you ask her later. Anne nodded. The performance was very exciting. Your voice was very memorable and unforgettable. Meg looked at Vicky with a smile. It was not flattery, but Meg's feelings after watching the performance. Of course. This is the best opera performance on the Norland continent. Vicky raised her chin slightly, like a proud little lion. There was a hint of arrogance in her red eyes. It is your honor to be able to hear such a performance. Meg looked at her. Although her words were crude, they were not crude, but it was still a little inappropriate to say such things to the few guests. Vicky lowered her head, and the red light in her eyes faded. She looked up at Meg, who had a strange expression on his face. Her expression changed slightly, and she waved her hands awkwardly.
I'm sorry.
She must have said something rude to you.
I
mean, thank you for watching. The tickets. Forget about the tickets. Chapter 2132. This young lady's sudden change in attitude caught Meg off guard, and he grasped a key piece of information. Was it the she that Vicky mentioned? Who was she?
Who was she?
He originally thought that Vicky was using her acting skills to protect herself, but now it seemed that this was not the case. This change might not be an act, but another soul that existed in her body. This became interesting. Combined with his previous guess, could it be that when a modern singer transmigrated, she did not succeed in occupying the whole body, but shared the same body with the original owner, thus causing the split state? It was a very interesting guess. Meg looked at Vicky with great interest and shook his head with a smile. After seeing such a wonderful performance, of course I have to give you a ticket. Vicky's eyes lit up. She looked up at Meg and could not help but show an expectant look. Their opera troupe had run out of food, and now the only valuable thing left in the troupe was the set of clothes she was wearing. But this was the only set of clothes she had. It was not only her daily clothes, but also Miss Black Cat's costume. If they sold this set of clothes, it was basically announcing that the Black Cat Song Troupe would be disbanded on the spot. But if this audience member could give them the ticket money, even if it was only 10 copper coins, they could buy some rice to make porridge, which could at least last for a few more days. The troupe members were also looking at them from not far away. When they heard that the head of the troupe was going to waive the ticket money, everyone's heart sank, but now it was lifted again. This audience member seems to be quite rich. He should be able to give at least 10 copper coins, right? Wow, look at his 2 little babies. They are so adorable. He should at least give 20 copper coins. I say, you are too unambitious. This is the first batch of guests who have finished watching our performance in half a month. He can't walk out of this door without 30 copper coins. Then I want to eat more rice for my porridge tonight. The opera performers were whispering to each other, wondering how much Meg would give for the ticket. My child likes your opera very much. She asked if she could draw the story of Miss Black Cat into a picture book. Meg was not in a hurry to pay. Instead, he looked at and said, "Draw it into a picture book?" Vicky thought for a while and looked at Meg. "Are you going to draw it for fun? Or do you want to publish it?" Wow, that's a very professional question. Meg was increasingly certain that this girl was not an ordinary person. Her copyright awareness had far surpassed most people in this era. "I'll consider it." Meg nodded. Vicky looked at Meg and said, "Miss Black Cat's story was written by me. If this little sister wants to publish it as a picture book, I need to see her work first. Once I'm sure it meets my expectations, we can discuss how to split the profits. You may not understand, but Miss Black Cat's story is very important to me, and it took me a lot of effort. I hope you can understand," Vicky explained in a gentle tone. "I can understand." Meg nodded. "This is the money for our tickets today. The opera was wonderful. I hope to see you perform again in the future." Meg took out 3 silver coins and handed them to Vicky and a piece of paper. "This is my address. Such a good performance shouldn't be trapped in a place like this. If you're interested, you can come to me. I can provide a better environment for you." This. Vicky looked at the 3 silver coins in her hand. She was surprised at first, but she hesitated when she heard Meg's words. "Don't worry. I just like your performance and the decision is in your hands." Meg took Anne and Amy's hands, nodded slightly at the actors standing not far away, and then walked out of the door. "By the way, the next time you come, maybe, and we'll have drawn Miss Black Cat's story. You can confirm if it meets your expectations." Meg looked back at Vicky and then left. Vicky held the 3 silver coins and the piece of paper in her hand and stood there for a long time without moving. After a while, the actors of the troupe gathered around and looked at Vicky. They wanted to say something, but they didn't. "Beanbox, what are you waiting for? This is 3 silver coins." Vicky came back to her senses and looked at the actors with disdain. "Tonight, we're eating meat." Meat. Everyone cheered. They had been starving for the past few days, and their eyes lit up when they heard about meat. "Idiot, take the money and buy 3 pounds of meat, 10 pounds of rice, and some vegetables." Vicky took out a silver coin and gave it to a middle-aged man who looked quite honest. "Okay." The man took the money like it was a treasure and quickly walked away. Vicky turned back into her room and opened the piece of paper. There was only one address on it: Romo Street, Saipan Tavern. She was very familiar with this address. A month ago, it was still a desolate scene. She also wanted to settle down there, but the money in her pocket didn't allow her to. 2 days ago, she went there again and was surprised to find that the flow of people on that street had skyrocketed. After asking a few people, she found out that it was because the 2 taverns had won the gold medal at the wine tasting conference, and Romo Street was about to take off. She was now regretting if her wallet had been a little better, the Black Cat Song Troupe would have been on the shortcut to take off. But she still wrote an application and filled in a rent that she couldn't afford. She wanted to make a last attempt. And now, the audience was ready to give her a chance. Although she didn't know where the performance venue was and what other conditions he had arranged for them, it would definitely be better than this rundown yard. And if she remembered correctly, this tavern was one of the taverns that had won the gold medal. That man was rich. "What do you think?" Vicky suddenly asked. "Isn't it just going to talk?" "If you're afraid, then I'll go." Vicky asked and answered her own question. "I'm afraid you'll fight with them." "I'm not afraid. What are you afraid of?" "Every time you can't beat them, I'll go." "I'm really afraid. Father, the opera was so good. Are we coming again next time?" After leaving the yard, Amy looked up at Meg and asked expectantly, If Amy likes it, we'll come again next time." Meg nodded with a smile. Other than eating, the little one had a rare interest in something. "Then can I draw Miss Black Cat?" and gestured in sign language. "And if you want to draw it, you can. But we can't print it and sell it before we get the authorization from Head Vicky." Meg nodded with a smile and was ready to teach the little one some knowledge about copyright. The Black Cat Song Troupe's performance completely exceeded his expectations, so he planned to give them a chance to perform in a more professional venue. And this would become a very important part of the ecology of Romo Street, even more important than the Saipan Tavern and the Titan Tavern. Art, it was still worth looking forward to. Chapter 2133. System. Can you analyze the language the troop leader sang just now? Meg asked in his heart as he sat in the carriage that stopped him. While Vicky's singing was stunning, Meg was even more curious about her identity. The system gave him the language pack of all the races on the Norland continent so that he could understand all the dialects without any hindrance. However, he could not understand the lyrics Vicky sang. Of course, it was normal not to understand some of the words. For example, the yodelers? After listening to it, you could only exclaim, "Fuck." However, Vicky's singing was not in this sequence. Her tone was low and her emotions were sad. There must be something to it. The language is not in the system's language library. It cannot be searched or translated directly. It is not a language commonly used on the Norland continent, the system replied quickly. Meg muttered, "Then, do you think she's a transmigrator or from a hidden race? Or perhaps, like they came out from underground? 50% hidden race, 30% transmigrator, 10% from the underground world, and 10% unknown." The system gave an analysis report, 50% transmigrator, 10% hidden race, 30% from the underground world, and 10% unknown. This was his deduction. From her awareness of copyright, Meg believed that she was not from a hidden race like Noah and the others. She must have lived in a place with a higher level of copyright protection. The ancients had a very high level of technology, so there must be a corresponding copyright protection system. If she was a transmigrator, then it would make sense that she had problems with the language, as well as her opera skills that exceeded the standards of the Norland continent. Of course, she should not be from Earth. This girl is definitely not simple. Meg was thinking about which building to convert into an opera house. With the Black Cat Song Troupe's current situation, it was difficult to even eat, let alone pay the 50,000 copper coins rent. Adhering to the concept of value investment, Meg had decided that if Vicky came to him, he would build an opera house for them, but at the same time, he would receive part of the opera troupe's profits in exchange. With Vicky's ability and the completion of Miss Black Cat's opera, he was very confident that this opera troupe would be popular and profitable. "Mr. Bobby, I'm sorry to inform you that the Black Cat Song Troupe has rejected our merger invitation, and that damned woman even tore my face apart." Pascal covered his bloody face with an angry expression. The young man standing in front of him shook his head and said, "I sympathize with your experience, but Vicky is a gentle girl. You shouldn't frame her like this." Pascal felt wronged. "You didn't see how crazy she was. She's like a lioness." Bobby took out a bag of silver coins and handed it to Pascal. He said indifferently, "This is your reward. Send a part of it to the Black Cat Song Troupe." They're in a difficult situation now, but they have many excellent actors. You know, there aren't many opportunities like this. Pascal took the money bag and opened it. His eyes lit up and his expression immediately became much more respectful. He nodded and said with a flattering smile, "I know. I'll go to the Black Cat Song Troupe again soon and let most of them become members of our Marca Song Troupe. Remember, you can make the Black Cat Song Troupe sink deeper into the mire, but you can't hurt Miss Vicky. She's mine." Bobby looked at Pascal with a hint of warning. I know. Pascal put away the money and respectfully watched Bobby get into the car and leave. He muttered, "Oh, I don't know what's so good about that woman. She has no figure and a terrible temper. He's willing to spend so much money on her." In the afternoon, Meg taught Mara how to cook drunkard's peanuts. This was a relatively simple dish, but it was still quite a challenge for Mara. Meg demonstrated and taught her step by step. Finally, he used his golden finger to guide her. In the end, it took Mara an entire afternoon to grasp the basics of how to cook drunkard's peanuts. Next, it's time to practice. When you get home, find some time to practice and master this dish as soon as possible. Meg grabbed a few slightly charred peanuts in the bowl and threw one into his mouth. He couldn't control the heat very well, so it already tasted a little strange. Yes. Mara nodded vigorously, her little face full of excitement. This was the first dish she learned from her master. Although it wasn't perfect, she felt that she had learned a lot. But master, is this really peanuts made by a drunkard? Mara couldn't help but ask the question that had been in her heart for the whole afternoon. She didn't think her master was a drunkard. Why did he have such a strange name? No, this is a peanut that will turn people into drunkards if they eat it. Meg shook his head with a smile. Because it goes well with alcohol.
Oh, I see.
Mara was enlightened. It was a little different from what she had imagined. By the way, Mara, we're going out tomorrow. Maybe we'll be gone for a few days. If a girl in a black dress comes looking for me, help me pass this to her, and then take her to room 101. Meg passed a brown paper bag to Mara. What's her name? Mara took the paper bag. Her name is Vicky. Okay, I'll remember it. I'll keep an eye here. Mara nodded seriously. Meg didn't ask Mara to stay for dinner. After all, she still had a hungry Effie waiting for her to go back and cook dinner. Amy hugged Ugly Duckling and went up to Meg. She looked up and asked if we're going back tomorrow, shouldn't we bring some gifts back for the sisters? Yes, if Amy hadn't mentioned it, I would have forgotten. Meg nodded with a smile. Speaking of which, they had been away for 2 weeks. It was time to bring some gifts back for the girls. In the evening, the 4 new employees arrived early. Meg arranged their work. Jones, who had experience as a cashier, would be in charge of the most important cashier's work. The other 3 girls would be in charge of taking orders, serving drinks, and cleaning the table. The addition of the new employees made Meg's work much easier. However, when the evening business ended, Jones looked at her exhausted colleagues and couldn't help but whisper to Meg, "Boss, maybe we need more colleagues." The business of the Saipan Tavern had far exceeded their expectations. It was also not comparable to the taverns they had worked in before. It was too difficult for 4 waiters to run such a tavern. Even if they were experienced, they would often make mistakes. Yes, I'll continue to look for more candidates. Meg nodded. He had also noticed this problem. His mentality was still a little out of Amy's mode. He always thought that one employee could do a lot of work. This was a little too much for ordinary waiters. Chapter 2134. After the operating hours, Meg brought the 2 children back to Chaos City via the flying restaurant overnight. The flying restaurant shrunk and stopped at Mamie's balcony. The spiral staircase was lowered, and Meg carried Amy, who was already asleep, down, and followed behind with her sketchbook. Recently, the little fellow was obsessed with creating and refused to sleep until 11 or 12. Why did you come back overnight? Irina walked out of the room and looked at Meg in surprise. I couldn't sleep well without you, Meg said with a smile. Huh? Irina rolled her eyes at him. He was the one who really couldn't sleep well tonight. And go to sleep after you finish this page. Meg stared at Anne and settled the 2 children down. Take a shower first. You reek of smoke and alcohol. Irina raised her hand to stop Meg from leaning forward. Together?
No.
Meg took a hot shower. After exercising for a while, he lay on the big round bed and stretched comfortably. Speaking of which, Mamie's was indeed the most comfortable place to stay. Is there a problem with the night elves? Meg asked Irina, who was leaning on his chest. And nothing. Irina panted slightly. I talked to Michael, and we plan to participate in tomorrow's meeting in the name of the night elves. I'm afraid that old witch Helena is going to flare up, Meg said with a smile. He could already imagine Helena's expression. This is no longer something she can decide. At least, I'm not representing the elves, Irina said nonchalantly. However, since we're going to form an alliance and form an allied army, we have to choose a leader to command the allied army.
What do you think about this?
Irina looked up at Meg with a serious expression. Meg thought carefully for a while, then shook his head and said, At present, there seems to be no one who can convince the masses. Even the dragons can't choose a leader, let alone the allied forces of the major races. If that's the case, I'm afraid that even if we form an alliance, we'll still be in a state of disunity, Irina said worriedly. Meg nodded with a solemn expression. They were facing Cthulhu and an undead army that was fearless and resolute in carrying out orders. If they were in a state of disunity, they would have no chance of winning this war. There were always conflicts of interest between the various races, and there were even grudges that were difficult to resolve. It was already extremely benevolent of them not to stab each other in the back. At this time, if there weren't strict rules for the various races to fight together, and if there wasn't a strong commander who could convince the masses, this battle would have been lost from the beginning. I think the only candidate is you. Irina looked at Meg with a burning gaze. Me? Yes. There's no one more suitable than you now. Irina nodded. Be it luring the lightning to battle Cthulhu outside of Chaos City, or becoming a free person after breaking off ties with the Roth Empire, and having sufficient strength and charisma, you're the most suitable candidate. Is it really as good as you say? Meg stroked his chin, and really thought about it seriously. Actually, this is also something that Michael mentioned to me today. If the Allied forces are in a state of disunity, this war will definitely be a disaster. Irina looked into Meg's eyes, and nodded with certainty. Now, the Norland continent needs you. Meg really fell into deep thought now. It wasn't that he was afraid, but he was worried that his ability wasn't enough to lead such a large-scale war, not to mention such a complicated situation. Even the experience that Alex left for him was limited to the small-scale wars with the orcs at the borders. Let's play. However, looking at Irina's encouraging and expectant gaze and the current stalemate, he really couldn't bring himself to reject her. They really didn't have a choice. All right, I'll stand up. Meg nodded. Irina smiled and pressed her red lips against his again. Again? The next morning, Meg asked Amy to go to the dormitory to call Yabamiya and the rest over for breakfast. Meanwhile, he prepared a huge table of breakfast early in the morning. Boss, you're finally back. Yabamiya said in surprise as she walked in with Amy in her arms and looked at Meg, who was still busy in the kitchen. Angela followed them in and excitedly said, a familiar smell. Is the life of having a delicious breakfast starting again? Boss, and Jane greeted them with a smile. Hannah came in with a bottle of wine and waved it at Meg as she said, Boss, my wine is ready to leave the factory. Do you want to try it? It's early in the morning, so I won't be drinking. Meg came out of the kitchen with a row of steamers, took the wine from Hannah's hand, and placed it on the counter. He didn't doubt Hannah's winemaking skills at all. Since she was sure that the wine was ready to leave the factory, it must be good wine. It seemed that the wine market was going to welcome a new barbarian, a barbarian who could sell large quantities of wine and maintain high quality. What's this? It's round and looks so cute. Is this a new breakfast you created? Yabamiya asked curiously as she looked at the soup dumplings in the steamer. Everyone's attention was also attracted by the stack of steamers. These are soup dumplings. Father recently made them for breakfast. They're super delicious. Amy climbed onto her personal high stool, took a plate, and reached out to pick up a soup dumpling.
I'll teach you how to eat it.
Meg placed a steamer in front of everyone with 3 soup dumplings as the core of the breakfast. Everyone watched as Amy picked up the soup dumpling and placed it on their plate shakily. Only then did they feel relieved. Then, they saw her take a small bite on the side of the dumpling, sipping the soup in small mouthfuls. Finally, she finished the dumpling with a filling. This seemingly ritualistic process caused everyone to stare in a daze. Have you all learned it? Amy asked everyone as she licked the oil on her sweet lips. I really don't know what to do with you all. Then I'll demonstrate it again. Before anyone could answer, the little girl had already skillfully picked up the second soup dumpling and continued to teach them seriously. Everyone smiled and followed Amy's example. They carefully picked up a soup dumpling and placed it on their plates. Then they took small bites while it was still warm. These soup dumplings are too delicious. We can drink soup, eat meat, and eat the skin. It's perfect. Yabamiya couldn't help but exclaim after finishing a soup dumpling. But the soup is so hot. I feel like I can't feel my tongue. Hannah stuck out her tongue with a sad expression. This is the tongue of a million winemakers. You have to cherish it, Angela reminded Hannah, who had just finished a soup dumpling elegantly. I can chill it for you. Amy smiled and reached out her hand. A ball of cold flames slowly rose. I'm done. Hannah immediately retracted her tongue and shook her head in refusal. Chapter 21:35. Breakfast ended on a happy note. As for the question of Meg's return and the reopening of the restaurant, Meg gave a negative answer. We're back this time to rest for 2 days. After that, we'll set off for our next destination. Meg smiled and said, therefore, the restaurant won't reopen for business for the time being. We'll follow the original plan and rest for a month. Boss, you don't know how much the customers miss you. There are dozens of people who come to the ice cream shop every day to ask when the restaurant will reopen, Yabamiya said bitterly. Yeah, there are even perverts blocking the entrance of our dormitory. Hannah nodded and said sadly, I thought they were lusting after our beauty. I didn't expect them to just want to eat your food. Isn't that too much? Meg smiled and listened to the girls talk about the interesting things that happened between him and the customers. He was a little surprised that Mamie's had such a special place in the hearts of the customers. He thought that the restaurant was just a place to eat. If this one didn't reopen, there would be another one. He didn't expect that so many people would stay at his place and not leave. It's not just the regulars. Recently, there have been many customers who came from other places. I heard that they came after reading a magazine called Total Food and Beauty. When they saw that the restaurant was closed, they could only leave in disappointment. Yabamiya looked at Meg and said, I've seen that magazine before. It was written by you, boss. There are people who came directly to the restaurant. Meg was even more surprised. They came for a magazine. He had underestimated the determination of these foodies. Yabamiya nodded and said, yeah, so you've really decided not to reopen for business for the next 2 days? Even if it's just for 2 days, it will bring some comfort to the customers. Forget it. They've just gotten used to living without me. If they lose me again, it will only make them more miserable. Meg smiled and shook his head. The main thing was, he had to save the world. If the world was gone, foodies wouldn't even have the chance to eat. Meg chatted with everyone for a while. He looked at the time and found an excuse to leave. The interracial conference was about to begin. Meg naturally couldn't miss such an occasion. In Chaos City, the various representatives had already taken their seats at the round table in the conference hall. The organizer of this meeting, the City Lord of Chaos City, Michael, was sitting in the middle as the host of this meeting. The representatives of the giant dragons were Lewis and Douglas. The Golden Dragon Tribe and the Frost Dragon Tribe had buried the hatchet. Recently, the Golden Dragon Tribe had gained a lot of prestige and support from the Dragon Tribe. They had obtained the right to represent the giant dragons at the Dragon Tribe convention. The elves sent Helena and Sally. As the new princess of the elven race, Sally's performance was becoming more and more mature. She had also broken through to the 8th tier, so she could be considered one of the best among the younger generation. The orc race was rather eye-catching. Connie had already become the only queen of the Twilight Forest. This was a scene that had not appeared in the orc race for hundreds of years. The hairless monk was sitting beside her, just like the number 1 bald guardian. No one dared to underestimate this pair of master and disciple. The king of the dwarves had arrived personally and was talking to the lord of the gnomes in a low voice. The topic was related to cannons. The demon race's representative team was still a little chaotic. The top 10 demon races had all sent their representatives, but they had not reached a consensus internally. And the most eye-catching one was the new chief of the vampires, Camilla. No one would have thought that the vampires would suddenly change their chief at such a time, even though it was considered a harmonious transition. The new chief of the forest trolls sat obediently. After being taught a lesson by Meg, she had no temper to speak of. On Lantis' side, the high priest, Dexter, and the king had already arrived. It was enough to show how important this meeting was to them.
Quick.
As Lantis' power was gradually revealed, they had already become the overlord of the ocean. They were on par with the scattered demons, and no one could ignore them. Night Elf, Irina is here. An announcement came from outside. Everyone turned to look at the door. Irina walked in slowly. She glanced around and sat down at the seat with her name written on it. Helena's face turned cold. She turned to look at Michael and said, Castellan Michael, Isn't this inappropriate? Irina and the Night Elves support the peace of the Nora continent and are willing to contribute to stopping the invasion of the undead army. It is reasonable for her to attend this meeting, Michael said calmly. Irina smiled at Helena. Her gaze paused on Sally for a while before she retracted it. Humph. Helena snorted coldly. However, the elves were on the decline, and today was not an occasion where she could just walk away. She could only express her stance and keep quiet. This lass seems to have become stronger again. Dracula looked at Irina in shock and mumbled softly. He felt that she seemed to be a little different from before. Has she become stronger again? Camilla also couldn't help but sit up straight to make herself appear more gracious and appropriate. However, after glancing at Irina, she still felt that there was a huge gap between her and this woman. Big Sister Irina is still as beautiful and powerful as ever. Connie looked at Irina with admiration. Even though she was already known as the Queen of the Twilight Forest, she knew that she had only learned a little about Irina. The entire place was silent. There were 2 empty seats on Michael's right. Those belonged to the Roth Empire's representative team. There was also an empty seat beside Irina. It belonged to that man. The Roth Empire's representative team has arrived. Andre and the Empire's Marshal, Dominic, walked into the venue. Andre's gaze swept across the various representatives present. He paused at the empty seat beside Irina before he and Dominic sat beside Michael under the guidance of the staff. Welcome, King Andre, Michael said with a smile. Sorry to have kept everyone waiting. Andre nodded slightly. He didn't look as arrogant as he did during the previous meeting. No one would have thought that the situation on the Norland continent would have such a drastic change in less than a month. Josh had pledged his loyalty to the devil, and the undead army had gathered in the extreme north under the devils, lead to head south. The arrogant Roth Empire could only tremble in fear in the face of the undead army and the devil. The peace agreement that had been rejected once appeared on the negotiating table again. The people sitting there were still the same group of people. However, this time, everyone already knew the outcome. Negotiations were no longer the goal. Everyone was concerned about how to deal with the undead army that threatened the entire Norland continent and the safety of all the races. Alex here. A man in black light armor walked in from the door. Chapter 2136. That man was here. Everyone's gaze turned to the door.
Alex.
This man who had once turned the tide outside Chaos City and sealed the devil that was about to break free and prevented a disaster. He was also the most powerful knight, or rather, the most powerful existence on the Norland continent in the past 10 years. The reason why all the races could gather in Chaos City so quickly had something to do with the photostone he brought back from the far north. It was hard to imagine what kind of tragic situation the unprepared races on the Norland continent would face if he hadn't discovered the existence of the devil and the undead army in advance. And his power might also be the only existence who had really broken through the 10th tier's upper limit in the past 1,000 years. The lightning tribulation that day was like the end of the world, and it had really shocked everyone. Guessing his power had also become the hottest topic among all the races recently. Without a doubt, Alex had already become an existence that could affect the situation on the Norland continent. Whether it was Irina, who followed him closely, or Atlantis, who was obviously loyal to him, they couldn't be ignored. Meg sat down beside Irina and nodded at her. It wasn't that he was the latest to show off. It was just that he had chatted with the ladies for a while longer. Furthermore, he was punctual. It was just that these people had come too early. Meg scanned the people present. The various races' representatives were about the same as before, but only Connie's voice was left among the orcs. The Moon Nation's great formation master, Jonas, was also present. He and Barbara were the Moon Nation's representatives for this meeting. The Moon Nation's formation masters played a huge role in sealing the half of Cthulhu outside Chaos City previously. This time, it was also Meg who asked Michael to ask for the Moon Nation's support. Cthulhu couldn't be killed. Meg was very clear about that. Even the Ancient Ones couldn't do it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have just sealed it again and not killed it directly. And the most hilarious person who set up the sealing spell formation was undoubtedly the formation master under Jonas' command. At this moment, Jonas was also looking at Meg. Their gazes met, and they nodded slightly at each other in greeting. "Master, I know Sister Irina, and Alex is Irina's man, so I know Alex," Barbara whispered. Jonas glanced at her with a hint of a smile in his helplessness. Michael stood up and said in a clear voice, "Everyone is here. Let the peace conference begin." The new peace treaty is now in everyone's hands. The content is the same as the previous version, and it is also the same as the peace treaty we signed 100 years ago. However, in the Boundless Sea realm, there will be an area outside the Demon Islands that belongs to the Lantis tribe. The staff distributed a thick book of treaties to every participant at the round table. The representatives of the various clans were not in a hurry to express their opinions. Instead, they flipped through the details. This was related to the interests of the various clans. They could not afford to be careless. The Endless Sea realm is our private land. Why should we let them occupy it? Furthermore, it's not far from our Demon Islands. They might set their eyes on our territory one day. "I don't agree," the chief of the Flaming Demons said angrily. "That's right. A tribe that popped out of nowhere wants to encroach on our sea," the Abyss Demons chimed in, expressing their dissatisfaction with this clause. Camilla looked at the two of them and sarcastically said, "Although this is a tribe that popped out of nowhere, they are a powerful tribe with more than 10 10th-tier powerhouses and Alex as their backing. Furthermore, they are able to survive in the sea, so they have a unique racial advantage. If the undead army invades southward, Lantis, who can survive under the sea, will definitely be the tribe that will have the last laugh. Now that they're willing to join the ranks to fight against the undead army, they are only claiming a piece of the sea that they can survive in. What right do you think you have to object? Can you go into the sea and chase them away?" The two chiefs were at a loss for words. They didn't know how to refute her words. The vampires have really chosen a terrible clan leader. At least Maynard has more courage and ambition than you. The chief of the Flaming Demons snorted through his nostrils. "No, Maynard is too cowardly. That's why I removed him from the position." Dracula, who was slumped in the chair, sat up slowly. His gaze swept across the representatives of the top 10 demon tribes. This is the attitude of the vampires. It's better to have a friendly neighbor than a strong opponent. Furthermore, the other party doesn't even care about your small islands. The demons looked at each other. After a short discussion, the minority obeyed the majority. They reached a consensus and agreed to acknowledge the existence of Lantis. This was also a helpless move. After all, as Camilla said, no matter how dissatisfied they were, they couldn't go to the endless ocean to fight Lantis. Furthermore, the other party was relying on Alex's golden thigh now. It was another matter whether they could win. Mag looked at Camilla with a slight smirk. This woman showed a rare side of her that was wise and far-sighted. The demons reached a consensus internally, which saved them some trouble. As for the battle for territory, the orcs had already lost their desire to fight for supremacy after the change of ownership. The Roth Empire was the first to face the threat of the undead army. They were still waiting for the other races to come to an agreement and send reinforcements. They had already lost the right to negotiate terms. There were a few races among the demons who were tempted to make a move, but they were already divided internally. Those few races couldn't do anything even if they wanted to. Hence, this treaty was basically agreed by all the races. It was something to be expected. Michael nodded and prepared to instruct for the signing ceremony. "Wait a minute," Connie suddenly called out just then. "Chief Connie, what do you have to say?" Michael asked Connie. "The orcs agree to sign this treaty, but before that, I have a condition that I need King Andre of the Roth Empire to agree to," Connie said to Andre. Everyone looked at Connie. The orcs and the Roth Empire had just gone through a terrible war. This kind of hatred couldn't be erased easily. Andre's expression also became serious. He sat up straight and looked at Connie. "Please speak." Connie stood up slowly and said to Andre, although from the results of the investigation, it was Josh who led the war against the orcs in the Roth Empire after he sold his soul to the devil, this war has caused great damage to the orcs. However, this war has caused great losses to our beastmen. Dozens of tribes have been slaughtered in the war, and hundreds of thousands of beastmen have lost their lives. The Twilight Forest has been left in ruins. Before signing the new treaty, the orcs need the Wrath Empire, which has not officially responded to this matter, to resolve the damage and losses that this war has caused to us orcs. Otherwise, the orcs will definitely not sign the treaty. We will use our own methods to avenge our dead tribesmen at all costs. Is Amy special today? Meg looked at Connie with a raised brow. He couldn't help but think. Chapter 2137. Connie's stance was very firm. If the Wrath Empire didn't immediately respond to the invasion of the Twilight Forest and give appropriate compensation, perhaps the war between the orcs and the Wrath Empire would happen earlier than the invasion of the undead army. This seemingly weak young lady's first target was the powerful Wrath Empire after stabilizing her position as the great chief of the orcs. Of course, a woman who could kill Oster and take over the August tribe was naturally not to be underestimated.
Everyone looked at Andre.
As the king of the Wrath Empire, he could make any decision on behalf of the Wrath Empire. Everyone also thought of something else. If the orcs were under Oster's control now, then the orcs would be absent from this meeting today. Moreover, they would attack the Wrath Empire at the same time as the meeting, paying blood for blood. In comparison, Connie was already considered a calm ruler. Meg looked at Connie with admiration. This lass's ability to control the situation was not bad. She could already control the situation without pulling any strings. Andre also stood up. He looked at Connie and nodded. I deeply regret and apologize to the orcs who died so tragically. This was caused by the devils. My son Josh lost his soul, and the families of my court officials were exterminated several times. From this, one can see how cruel and dangerous the devils are. Of course, the Wrath Empire cannot shirk its responsibility for this. I am willing to apologize to the orcs on behalf of the Wrath Empire, and I am also willing to make some compensation to comfort the dead orcs. However, I hope that the orcs can fight the devil and the undead army together with the Wrath Empire to avenge the innocent orcs and protect the remaining orcs. This is a little overwhelming. Meg was a little shocked. Andre's words were very good at pushing the blame. Anyway, this had nothing to do with him or the Wrath Empire. It was all the devil's fault. Because of the devil, he lost a son, a few officials, and a batch of brave soldiers. As a victim, he was willing to make some compensation to the other victim. But more importantly, the two victims should work together to fight the devil and take revenge together. Look, in just a few words, a war-persecuting country became a pitiful little country. Moreover, it was reasonable and hard to refute. In comparison, Connie's previous words were neither painful nor itchy, and even seemed a little unreasonable. Connie was slightly taken aback, and a hint of anger appeared on his face. In terms of negotiation skills and words, she was naturally far inferior to an old fox like Andre. It was only after she had communicated with him several times over the past 2 days that she was able to grasp the message so firmly. Now that Andre's words were neither light nor heavy, he had diverted the problem and cleared the responsibility. Clearly, he didn't want to take on too much responsibility. However, this was unacceptable to the beastmen. Although she was now the great chief of the orcs, she still had to seek justice for her dead tribesmen if she wanted to convince the masses, even if she didn't start a war with the Wrath Empire. The devil is our common enemy, but the butchers who killed hundreds of thousands of orcs don't have any remorse now. Connie said in a low voice, we only have 3 requests. First, hand over the generals of the 3 armies that invaded the Northwest in the previous war to us orcs. Second, compensate the orcs with a compensation of 1 million copper coins per person. Third, promise to hand Josh over to the orcs after we capture him. I can agree to the second and third request. Even with a compensation of 1 million copper coins per person, it will be difficult to compensate the innocent orcs who died tragically. As for Josh, who has lost his humanity and was manipulated by the devil to commit all these sins, I will also hand him over to the orcs for punishment." Andre nodded with a serious expression. However, the soldiers were following orders. Josh should be the one to bear the responsibility for this, and not the soldiers. This time, the Roth Empire will gather all the armies to go up north to stop the undead army. The Northwest Army will be the vanguard to go up north to fight for the Norland continent. Therefore, I can't agree to your request of punishing the soldiers. I hope you can understand. Connie looked at Andre and fell silent. The hall also became quiet. Both sides had their own standpoints, but they both hoped to stick to their positions. Meg frowned. It was understandable that Andre wanted to protect the soldiers of the Northwest Army. Just as he said, the soldiers were following orders. Being able to follow orders was a sign of strict military discipline. Fighting all the way to the August tribe also showed the strength of the Northwest Army. If Andre handed these soldiers over to the orcs to be punished, it would definitely chill the morale of the soldiers, and even cause the morale of the army to be unstable. Even if Josh was controlled by the devil, the second prince was the one who gave the order, and he was using the king's name. On this matter, Andre would definitely not give in. As for the orcs, they needed an outlet to vent their accumulated anger. If Connie couldn't balance the internal conflict, her position as chief would be unstable. It was a difficult stalemate. However, this was also within his expectations. However, they didn't have much time left. She had sent him the news of Cthulhu and the undead armies gathering last night. The undead armies' numbers were increasing rapidly, and it was obvious that they were gathering. They might be heading south soon. If the orcs and the Roth Empire continued to argue about the war reparations, causing the peace treaty to be unable to be signed, the undead army might have already headed south while they were still in the meeting. Meg stood up and looked at Connie and Andre. He said in a low voice, "Once the undead army heads south, we will have to sacrifice a lot of lives to stop them. This number will far exceed the number of people who died in the conflicts and wars between the different races in the past 100 years. We don't have much time left, so I hope that both of you can put aside your hatred for the time being and focus on the war that we are about to face. I know you have seen the photo stone, but you might not know how powerful that devil is because you haven't really seen it. But you've all seen the devil that was sealed outside Chaos City. The devil that escaped the seal is even stronger. At the very least, I don't have any chance of winning against it. I don't even have the confidence to fight it and buy time for the spell formation masters. As for the million-strong undead army, they don't feel pain and have no life. They don't fear death, they don't know fatigue, and they don't need to be replenished. If we want to stop them from heading south at the border of the icy plains, we will have to pay a terrible price. The number of orcs who died is not just a number." Connie looked at Meg. Meg nodded and said, "I know, but if we don't react quickly, there will be more families who will lose their husbands, children, and even everyone." Chapter 2138. Connie pursed his lips and pondered in silence. Andre looked at Meg in surprise. He didn't expect him to speak up for the Roth Empire at this time. Michael nodded slightly. He was also thinking about how to mediate the conflict between the two parties so that the peace treaty could be signed as soon as possible. Meg's words were more convincing than his. "I agree with Alex very much. The most important thing now is to get rid of the devils and the undead army. If the entire Norland continent falls, the gains and losses of every city and lake will be meaningless. Chief Connie, I will get the Minister of the Interior to arrange for the payment of the war compensation as soon as possible. Please give those soldiers a chance to bathe in blood and kill the enemy," Andre said sincerely to Connie. Connie looked at Rex instinctively. Alex's intervention made her feel a little lost. That may be the case, but there are indeed some scum in the Northwest Army who should take responsibility for their crimes. "Isn't that right, Marshal?" Mag asked again. This time, he was looking at Dominic, who was sitting beside Andre. "A knight's code of conduct is to not harm innocent women and children. This is also the bottom line of a human being. No matter which officer gave such an inhumane order, as a knight, he should respect his own beliefs and principles. As for those generals who forced the soldiers to kill the captives, burn, and pillage. Shouldn't they be cleared out to apologize to those innocent souls who died unjustly? What right do they have to die on the battlefield like warriors? Are they worthy? Andre's lips moved. He glanced at Dominic, but he still chose to remain silent. Dominic saw that Andre didn't say anything, so he could only stand up. After a moment of silence, he nodded and said, "They are indeed not worthy to be called knights, and not worthy to die on the battlefield as warriors." Meg nodded and sat down. Dominic looked at Andre and said, "Your Majesty, please allow me to clear out the scumbags in the army. They are not worthy to stay in the army and are not worthy to be called knights." Andre said in a low voice, "All right. After clearing out these people, inform the whole army and let the orcs deal with them." "Great Chief Connie, what do you think about this?" Andre asked Connie. "If you can keep your word, I agree with this solution." Connie nodded, and his expression relaxed. In the end, Alex still gave the Beastmen face and a way out. This was the result that she had expected. Not bad. Irina looked at Meg and transmitted her voice. The corners of Meg's mouth curled up slightly, but he remained calm. Actually, the outcome was the same. It was just that Meg had given the Roth Empire a legitimate reason to get rid of some of the scum in the army. And in the Northwest Army, most of these dregs belong to Sean. Look, this is another brilliant plan that kills two birds with one stone. The conflict between the orcs and the Roth Empire was resolved, and the signing of the peace treaty became much smoother. Connie and Andre signed a mediation agreement on the spot, and both parties confirmed the matter that they had discussed previously. The Roth Empire would hand over some of the war criminals to the orcs and pay a huge sum of war compensation. They also promised to hand Josh over to the orcs if they could capture him. After that, the various representatives had a discussion about some of the details of the peace treaty. After some amendments, the final version was finalized. The various representatives all signed the new peace treaty. 100 years of peace has begun again. "Everyone here is very impressive," Michael said emotionally as he looked at the various representatives present. Chaos City had worked hard for decades for this moment. They didn't expect to renew the peace treaty under such circumstances. The series of complicated processes only ended when the sun was setting. As a witness, Mag was also an unimportant bystander. He even made time to go home to cook dinner for the children and had a few drinks with Irina before returning to the venue at night. Now that the peace treaty had been signed, they naturally had to discuss how to form an allied army to go up north to fight against the undead army. According to the latest news, the undead army has reached 1 million people. There are many terrifying ancient corpses among them. I'm afraid they are as powerful as 10th-tier powerhouses. There are also powerhouses like Rankster, who have surpassed 10th tier, and even more powerful devils. Meg looked at everyone with a serious expression and said, "We need to form a sufficiently strong allied army to be confident of stopping the undead army in the extreme north." 1 million people. The various representatives were in an uproar when they heard that. This was far beyond everyone's expectations. "Is the source reliable?" Lewis looked at Meg solemnly. "I went to the north last night. The ancient corpses are gathering on the ice field. There are more than 1 million of them, and they could come south at any time." Mag took out a photo stone and played the image that she sent him yesterday. The densely packed ancient corpses almost covered the entire ice field, and one couldn't see the end of it. They were all gathering in one direction with a clear goal, as if they were summoned by something. The various representatives had serious expressions. Alex wouldn't lie about such things. Besides, this photo stone image was very convincing. What did 1 million-strong army mean? On the Norland continent, only the Roth Empire, which had thrived for 100 years, had 1 million-strong army. Unless all the other races were soldiers, it was very difficult to form 1 million-strong army. Furthermore, the logistical personnel needed to support 1 million-strong army would exceed 1 million people. It wasn't something that any race could bear easily. However, the other party was an undead army. They were ancient corpses that had been dead for thousands of years. They were driven by the devil and didn't need logistical support. They moved in unison, and weren't afraid of death. How could they play this game? The representatives who wanted to make up the numbers were a little confused now. There were even some who wanted to avoid it. Andre frowned slightly. The various representatives had their own thoughts. If they weren't willing to send out their elites to help, the Roth Empire would be in danger. The Roth Empire will send out all our elite troops, a total of 600,000 soldiers and magic casters, to the north to fight against the undead army. We will also be responsible for most of the logistical support for the Allied army, Andre said loudly. This concerns the safety of the Norland continent. I hope everyone can step forward. Meg nodded slightly. 600,000 elites and the Allied army's logistical support. Andre had almost taken out all the assets of the Roth Empire. He was quite sincere. However, there was no other choice. The Roth Empire was the first to bear the brunt. If the Roth Empire wasn't sincere, they couldn't expect the various races to send their elites to join the Allied army. Michael then said loudly, Chaos City is willing to send 30,000 of our most elite guards to join the Allied army to fight against the undead army. We will also be responsible for all the logistical support. Chapter 2139. Chaos City was one of the weaker races. They only had about 40,000 guards, and they were sending out 30,000 elites. This time, they were showing their sincerity. Michael knew the severity of this crisis. After a few internal meetings in Chaos City, they finally decided on this number. Lewis said in a low voice, "The giant dragons will send out 8,000 giant dragons to support this battle. 8,000 giant dragons." Meg's eyes lit up. This was a true aerial attack ability. Giant dragons all had long-range attacks, and most of them were area of effect skills. They could suppress the undead army in the air. The number of giant dragons was the least among all the races on the Norland continent. 8,000 giant dragons were basically the core power of the giant dragons. It seemed like the giant dragons were still very concerned about the demons leaving Giant Dragon Island. Soon after, all the other races also expressed their stance. Lantist would send out 10,000 soldiers to join the Allied army. Only Meg knew that this was Lantist's full combat power without any reservations. The goblins would send out 5,000 goblin warriors and 10,000 logistics elites to be in charge of logistics. The goblins were known for their strong logistical and planning abilities. After all, they were able to live in a complex underground cave, yet they were still able to keep the entire race in order and produce the most minerals in the entire continent. They still had racial talents. The trolls would send out 10,000 troll warriors and 20,000 logistics trolls to be in charge of transporting the snowfield. The dwarves would send out 5,000 dwarven warriors to be in charge of the repair of the Allied army's weapons and construction. They were very outstanding tools. The orcs would send out 200,000 orc warriors to join the Allied army. As a powerful race that could challenge the Roth Empire, the orcs also had a huge number of tribal warriors. However, the orcs had made a request that the Roth Empire had to be in charge of all the logistics for the orcs. Andre had already agreed to this request on the spot. All the races had already expressed their stance. Only the elves and demons had yet to express their stance. Everyone looked at Helena and the representatives of the demons. It was indeed not easy to make a decision between the scattered demons and the divided elves. Helena was not in a hurry to express her stance. Instead, she looked at Irina and asked, "How many night elves will go to the battlefield?" Irina calmly said, "I've already sent out the notice to join the battle. Currently, there are 3,500 elves who meet the requirements to join Chaos City's army. 1,000 of them will be warriors, while 2,500 will be in charge of healing and logistics." "Very good. In this aspect, you are very much like Her Majesty." Helena nodded before announcing in a clear voice, "The elven race will dispatch 20,000 elven warriors and 10,000 healers. They will be responsible for their own logistics." Meg looked at Helena in surprise. The Wind Forest wasn't very harmonious right now. He originally thought that Helena would leave most of her main forces in the Wind Forest to guard against any unexpected changes, but she sent out almost all of her elite forces. After Helena expressed her stance, All of the representatives turned toward the representatives of the 10 major demon tribes. Because there wasn't a single powerful race that could convince the masses, and the previous alliance had collapsed due to internal strife, the current demon race didn't have a unified voice at all, nor did they have someone who could speak for them. Since the situation is already like this, let's gather together. Before we came, I'm sure all of you know how many people you can send, and how many people your affiliated races can send. Dracula put down the wine glass in his hand, and smilingly said, "The vampires can send 1,000 people." Given the number of vampires, 1,000 vampires was already a huge sum. Since all the races are here to protect the Norland continent, let's not hide anymore. If we can't stop them, we might be even more cowardly in the future. The leader of the spatial demons slammed the table and said, "The spatial demons and the affiliated demons can send 10,000 warriors." After the vampires and spatial demons expressed their stance one after another, the other demon tribes couldn't hide anymore and also expressed their stance one after another. Apart from the flaming demons and abyss demons who had exhausted themselves in the previous civil war and were still wary, the other demon tribes were quite sincere. In the end, the Demon Islands sent out 100,000 soldiers, which was second only to the Roth Empire and the Orcs.
Great.
In this way, all the races on the Norland continent will also have 1 million strong soldiers. We will definitely not be at a disadvantage in the battle against the Devil's 1 million undead army. Andre clapped his hands and cheered. All the races were already very sincere about sending out their troops. It had even far exceeded Andre's expectations. This lineup and specifications represented the strongest combat power on the Norland continent at the moment. 100 years ago, all the races were at war. 100 years later, all the races had to fight side by side against the devils. The representatives of the various races also smiled. When they heard Meg mention the 1 million undead army, they were indeed a little shocked. But now that all the races had sent out their troops and formed an unprecedentedly strong army, they finally felt the courage to fight. Michael stood up and loudly said, "The joint army has been formed." But for such a huge army from all the races to be fully effective on the battlefield, we have to decide tonight how we should command and who should be in charge. A plate of loose sand will only end up as the side that gets slaughtered on the battlefield. After Michael said that, the representatives of the various races fell silent for a short while before they started discussing.
Command? Ha.
The warriors of the Abyss race only listen to my commands. I don't want to listen to anyone's commands and lose my life for nothing, the Abyss Demon Chief said with a cold smile. The Flaming Tribe won't listen to anyone's commands either. Isn't it just killing undead? One fireball to burn a bunch of them. Do we still need to command? I'm afraid it's not easy to choose a commander. If we choose a biased one, he will definitely protect his own people and send the other races to the front line, Helena said with an underlying meaning. War is not child's play. A war with 1 million elites is also a rich war that no one has fought before. Who can take on this responsibility? Lewis asked with a frown. In the loose alliance that had just been formed, the interests of all the races were related. It was obviously not realistic to want to immediately choose a commander who could convince the masses. The giant dragons were rather prestigious, but giant dragons had always relied on their strength to suppress their opponents in the air. How could they have a military talent who could command and control an army of 1 million? Moreover, once they decided who the commander was, it meant that the commander had the right to deploy all the races. The representatives of the various races, naturally, had some thoughts. Seeing that everyone was noisy, Michael also loudly said, "The various races have formed a powerful alliance. If there is no one who can command them and use good steel on the blade, we have no chance of winning. I think we should use voting to choose a fair and convincing commander so that the alliance can become more efficient and powerful to deal with the attacks of the devils and undead army." Chapter 2140. Michael's words made everyone gradually quiet down. They were all races that had survived the racial war 100 years ago. They were all aware of the importance of an outstanding commander and tactical cooperation. Back then, the elves had almost lost the entire forest, but they managed to chase the orcs and demons out of the forest under the command of Helena and the Elven Queen. They relied on their powerful charisma and outstanding commanding ability. And some time ago, the Roth Empire's 100,000-strong northwestern cavalry charged straight into the Twilight Forest and split into 3 groups to tear the entire forest apart. They were unstoppable and unstoppable, which further proved the importance of tactical cooperation and commanding ability. One had to know that the orcs were not weak. However, the tribes that were fighting for themselves could not form a powerful combat force at all. They could only be crushed mercilessly. Douglas nodded and said, "I agree. The current situation concerns the safety of the Norland continent. If we only care about personal gains and losses and the interests of a certain race, the final result will only be a crushing defeat." We dwarves agree too. "There's no point in fighting a battle without any rules," the king of dwarves said loudly. "The goblins have no objections. Let's vote and choose a person that everyone agrees with to be the commander," the chief of the goblins said. "If that's the case, how should we choose the person?" Helena asked. Everyone also looked at Michael. Michael looked at everyone and said, "Everyone here is a person of virtue and prestige from the various races. You are also the best powerhouses and wise people on the Norland continent. All of you are qualified to participate in the election. This battle concerns the survival of the Norland continent. It's touching that all the races are willing to step forward at this time. The choice of the commander is extremely important. I hope that someone with the ability can step forward to take on this responsibility and become a candidate. Every race here has the right to vote. The candidate with the most votes will become the commander that everyone agrees with." The rules were simple and the candidates were honest. Everyone present had the right to participate in the election. Based on the principle of voluntary participation, all the races would vote together to choose the final commander. The person with the most votes would become the commander, and everyone would agree with that. This method of choosing the commander made all the representatives nod their heads in agreement. At this time, it was naturally not suitable for the Dance Forest Assembly to choose an alliance leader. Since that's the case, I won't stand on ceremony. Our Abyssal Demon clan has rich combat experience. Whether it's the racial war back then, or the various large and small battles over the years, I've commanded no less than 100 battles. If you choose me as the commander, I'm naturally the most suitable one, the Abyssal Demon clan patriarch said confidently as he stood up with a smile. Is it because you didn't lose miserably enough in the Wind Forest back then? Helena laughed disdainfully. You can't even defeat a flaming devil tribe. If we expect you to fight against the devils, isn't that the same as using the elites of various races to fill an ice cave? Irina sneered. Back then, the Abyss Demon clan had committed all sorts of crimes in the Wind Forest. Now, he still dared to show off and use it as capital. Naturally, the two of them couldn't stand it anymore. You? The Abyssal Demon's face flushed red. He couldn't utter a single word for a long time. He angrily sat down. The Flaming Devil clan patriarch, who was sitting at the side, originally wanted to show off, but he didn't expect to be implicated before he could even stand up. He clenched his fists and pressed himself back into his seat. And this setback from the Abyssal Demon clan patriarch also calmed down the demons who were originally itching to make a move. They couldn't even convince the Fiend race's members, let alone convince the other races in such an occasion. Uncle, aren't you going to try? Camilla whispered to Dracula. Dracula shook his head and sighed. Although I know my charm is limitless, I haven't even commanded a battle of 1,000 people. I really don't know how to fight a battle of 1,000,000 people. Camilla pursed her lips. I'm just saying. Maybe you can't even get a vote from the demons. I believe your words, too. Dracula nodded honestly. If the demons could be unified, they would be more powerful than the orcs. It was a pity that they were scattered. After a moment of silence, Lewis stood up and said to everyone, Count me in. We, the giant dragons, have a strong ability to control the situation. In the racial war back then, the Golden Dragon clan could be considered to have many achievements. Lewis was a powerhouse who had been famous for a long time, and the giant dragons were very powerful. Lewis could indeed convince the others easily. Andre nodded slightly at Dominic, who was beside him. Dominic stood up and said, "I am Dominic, the Marshal of the Roth Empire. I have commanded 1,000,000 cavalrymen of the Roth Empire. Whether it is tactical arrangements or army management, I have decades of experience. This is destined to be a high-intensity war. The cooperation between the various races is very important. I think I can be a good commander." Everyone present couldn't help but take a few more glances at Dominic. Just like what Dominic said, he was the only one present who had truly managed 1,000,000 cavalrymen. Although Dominic wasn't the one who commanded the Northwestern Army's war against the Orcs, it was said that Dominic was the one who came up with the attack plan. The Northwestern Army only had to follow the plan, and they almost conquered the Twilight Forest. Humans were indeed better at using tactics than other races. Otherwise, it wouldn't be easy for humans to survive on the Norland continent with their weak bodies and weak individual abilities. Helena stood up and calmly said, "During the war among species, I once led the elves to win against the strong and chased the orcs and demons out of the wind forest. I created many miracles in war. I think I can lead this war well." Everyone was a little surprised that Helena would participate in the election. However, what she said was true. The elves had turned the tables in the war among species. The two powerful races, the orcs and demons, were beaten into the background, and Helena, as the high priestess of the elves, had indeed played a crucial role. With people participating in the election one after another, everyone's gaze finally landed on Alex. "Will he participate?" Connie whispered. "Perhaps. Actually, no one is more suitable than him," Rex said to Meg. Dexter was also looking at Meg with anticipation in his eyes. Meg stood up and calmly said, "I will participate." It was simple and clear. "I think no one knows the devils and the undead army better than me and how to deal with them," Meg continued. It was a straightforward and irrefutable reason. Looking at the expressions of the various races' representatives, Meg knew he had won. Chapter 2141. Everyone present looked at Meg. No one could think of a rebuttal to Meg. Who was this? A man who attracted the lightning tribulation to suppress the devil on his own, and successfully stalled for time to seal the devil when everyone was about to give up. The whistleblower for the undead army incident this time. The promoter of world peace. And the undisputed #1 powerhouse on the Norland continent. Then he participated in the election. A smile appeared on Dexter's face. His vote was naturally for Lord Alex. Irina looked up at Meg with a smile on her face. He was indeed her man. He was so handsome when he stood up for her. There shouldn't be any suspense now. Camilla looked at Meg and shrugged. "Unless I participate, there won't be any suspense." Dracula nodded. Connie glanced at Rex. "You are the chief. This decision should be made by you," Rex said with a smile. Connie nodded. He already had a decision in his heart. After Meg participated in the election, no one stood up to express their intention to participate. "Is there anyone else who wants to participate?" Michael asked everyone. No one spoke. "All right. Now we will use the few who expressed their intention to participate as candidates. All races will vote. The one with the highest number of votes will become the supreme commander of the Allied army,"
Michael said loudly.
"Everyone, do you have any objections?" Dracula raised his hand and asked seriously, "I have a question. We demons can't reach an agreement internally. How should this vote be counted?" Michael pondered for a moment and said, "Why don't you all vote among the 10 races first, and then the one with the highest number of votes will be the demon's choice. If you're a brother, vote for me," the Abyss Demon Chief said as he patted his chest. Alex, the Flaming Demon Chief, was the first to express his opinion. "Alex." Dracula expressed his opinion on behalf of the vampires. "Alex." In the end, Alex defeated the Abyssal Demon Patriarch with a 9-1 margin and won the first vote. None of them are reliable. The Abyssal Demon Patriarch's face darkened. This was a great loss of face. The other races chose to vote anonymously. The staff handed out voting papers, and the representatives of each race wrote down their preferences on the paper before submitting them to Michael. Chaos City, the giant dragons, the Roth Empire, the orcs, the elves, the goblins, the dwarves, the lantist, and the trolls had a total of 9 votes. In addition to the vote that the demons had already cast, the one with the highest number of votes would become the supreme commander of the Allied army. The representatives of the various races stared at the crystal box in front of Michael. There was no chance of it being fake. Of course, Michael would not play such tricks in front of a group of 10th-tier powerhouses. Now that all the votes are in my hands, I will open the votes on the spot and count the votes directly. Michael opened his arms and gestured to everyone before reaching into the box to take out the first vote. He then opened it and looked at everyone. Dominic. Michael read out the name on the vote. The representatives of the various races looked solemn as they waited for the results to be announced. Michael then took out the second vote. Helena. Michael read out the name of the second vote. Dominic. The third vote was still Dominic's. Yo. Many people looked at Dominic. It seemed like there were still people who trusted this experienced marshal. Meg also glanced at Dominic. From a technical point of view, Dominic was undoubtedly the most suitable candidate to be the commander of the Allied army. However, this war was different from any other war between the Roth Empire and any other race in the past. He had to be the supreme commander in order to control the situation. Cthulhu could not be killed. He could only reseal it. Fighting against the undead army was not the goal. Resealing Cthulhu would remove the threat of the undead army automatically. Of course, with Cthulhu's slyness and unstoppable power, the Allied army would have to pay a huge price to stop the invasion of the undead army. Andre's eyes also lit up. It would be best if Dominic could become the commander of the Allied army. Alex. Michael took out the fourth vote and read out the name on it. 2 people, 2 votes. It seemed like there was still some suspense. The representatives of the various races looked thoughtful as they started to think about what would happen if these 2 people became the commander of the Allied army. Michael took out the 6th vote. Alex. 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 The votes that only had Alex's name on them killed all suspense in the end. Alex received 7 votes and became the commander of the Allied army with an absolute advantage. This was a world that worshipped power after all. Moreover, compared to Dominic, who was loyal to the Roth Empire, Alex, who had betrayed the Roth Empire, was indeed a more reassuring choice. Moreover, just as Alex said, no one in this world knew the devil better than he did. He was the only man who could compete with the devil. He was also the only one who could retreat safely from the devil's hands time and time again. Alex was also born in the military. He was the commander of the Northwest Army back then, and was once seen as the successor of the Roth Empire's marshal. Alex received 7 votes. He will become the highest commander of the Allied army, Michael announced loudly. As expected of him, Camilla looked at Meg and couldn't help but praise him. Almost everyone trusts him. He's too impressive. Connie looked at Meg with admiration. The representatives of the various races also congratulated him. Meg stood up and said to everyone, "Thank you for your trust. I hope we can trust each other in the future and cooperate seamlessly to destroy the devil and the undead army together. Don't worry. I can guarantee that the giant dragons will carry out your orders." Lewis laughed heartily. Dexter stood up and respectfully said, "Lantist is loyal to you." Connie stood up and also respectfully said, "The orcs are willing to follow your orders. The Roth Empire respects the choice of the various races. We will listen to your orders." Andre also made his stance clear. The centralization of power was smoother than Meg had expected. Meg looked at everyone solemnly and said, "This is a war that is destined to be difficult. It requires great courage and wisdom. Therefore, I hope that Marshal Dominic can be my deputy. He has very rich commanding experience and tactical deduction ability. He is an outstanding strategist." Everyone looked at Dominic. Dominic stood up and cupped his fists at Meg. "I will do my best." Chapter 2142. After the new peace agreement was signed, Meg became the commander of the Alliance army with an absolute advantage. According to the agreement between the various races, the Alliance army signed an agreement that included the exact number of troops each race would send out, as well as some details about logistics. Dominic, who had been the commander of the three armies for decades, was much more experienced than Meg in this aspect, so he easily passed the responsibility to Dominic. Meanwhile, he met with the Moon Nation's formation masters, Jonas and Barbara, alone. The key to this war was how to reseal Cthulhu, so the sealing formation became extremely important. This time, there was no half-broken formation left for you to repair. They couldn't even determine Cthulhu's location and couldn't make it wait somewhere for you to seal it. In the face of absolute power, many plans became pale and powerless. Jonas looked at the 3 points that Meg had drawn on the map and thought for a while. He said seriously, "I need to go to the scene to determine which position is the most suitable for setting up the formation. According to your estimation of the attack time, we can only complete the setting up of one formation." "All right, I'll get Michael to send someone to bring you there." Meg nodded. I'm sleepy. Master, take your time. I still have something to do, so I won't accompany you." Barbara looked outside a few times absent-mindedly, but she couldn't sit still in the end. She got up to say goodbye, and then slipped away. "Her Highness might be busy," Jonas explained a little embarrassedly. "Young people are all like that." Meg smiled. He knew what Barbara was in a hurry to do. The alliance had been formed, but there were many disputes between the various races. For example, the route the Alliance army would take when passing through each race's territory, the logistical supplies along the way, and so on. Although Meg was the chief commander, he didn't intend to take care of everything, no matter how big or small. Therefore, he left early with Irina. "Master, I'll leave these matters to you guys. I'm going back to sleep and have a meal," Connie said to Rex after yawning, and then left in a flash. "Uncle, you can go back by yourself later. I have something to do, so I'll take my leave first," Camilla said to Dracula, and also slipped away. Sigh. "Wait a minute." Dracula looked at Camilla, who had disappeared through the door, and raised his eyebrows. "This lass, didn't I choose you as the clan leader to do these things?" TSK, TSK, TSK. "Our little Connie has become the queen of the Twilight Forest," Camilla said with a smile as she walked out of the city lord's manor and looked at Connie, who was swinging her legs on the stone lion in front of the door. "Ho-ho, that's right. I thought I would be the first to ascend to the throne as the queen of the Moon Nation, but now it seems that both of you are faster than me," Barbara said with a smile as she looked at the two of them. "Actually, I only wanted to be an assassin in the beginning." Connie looked up at the sky at a 45-degree angle and sighed softly. "All right, don't fill the cup." Camilla patted Connie's head and said with a smile, "We haven't had dinner yet. The most important thing now is to fill our stomachs." Gurgle. Connie's stomach growled in tandem.
Yes.
"I'm starving. Let's go back to the restaurant now." Connie nodded in agreement while rubbing her stomach. Then, she walked forward quickly. "The restaurant is this way." Barbara quickly grabbed her and dragged her in the opposite direction. She sighed and said, "You're only fit to be a queen like this. Let go of me. I know the way." Connie tried to struggle. "Speaking of which, how did you kill Oster with your sense of direction?" Although he lost an arm, he was still a level 10 powerhouse after all, Camilla asked curiously as she looked at Connie, who was being held back. There were many legends about Connie killing Oster in the pugilistic world. That was because it symbolized the change of power in the Twilight Forest and also meant that Connie had replaced Oster. However, more people suspected that Oster didn't die in the hands of Connie, but in the hands of Lex. However, Lex gave the credit to Connie so that she could secure her position. Even Camilla and the rest who were familiar with Connie were curious about this. After all, Connie was a person with no sense of direction who could even get lost while delivering food. Asking her to be an assassin who could jump 2 grades to kill a level 10 powerhouse did sound very magical. Just sneaking into the August tribe and finding Oster's bedroom was a huge challenge for her. Or rather, it was an impossible mission. Wow, you don't believe in your sister's abilities? Connie looked at the two of them with an aggrieved and hurt expression. It's not that we don't believe. Barbara shook her head and said seriously, it's just that we can't believe it. Camilla nodded with a smile too. All right. Although I didn't find his room by myself, I did kill him. I used 3 swords when he was asleep. Connie gestured with 3 fingers. Impressive, right? You really killed him? Barbara looked at Connie in shock. Although she was a level 8 spatial mage, she never thought that someone could jump 2 grades and kill a level 10 powerhouse. Please call me an assassin. Connie lifted her head and revealed a proud chin. Impressive. Camilla gave her a thumbs up. She already believed her. In official battles, it was extremely rare to succeed in a level-skipping challenge. But if it was an assassination, it was a different story. Even a level 10 powerhouse couldn't maintain a vigilant and defensive state all the time. And an assassin would find the moment when you were the most relaxed to give you a full blow and end the battle. For example, a mage could be killed by an ordinary human with a sharp blade in his sleep. Connie, who was the disciple of the hairless monk, had trained her assassination skills. It was reasonable for her to succeed in assassinating Oster in his sleep.
Cool.
Barbara's eyes lit up, and she looked at Connie expectantly. Why don't you teach me how to be an assassin too? Connie glanced at Barbara and shook her head. You can't. Why can't I? Barbara puffed out her chest and said defiantly, I'm a famous young genius in the Moon Nation. But you're a mage. You exposed yourself the moment you took out your magic wand. You might be killed before you could even complete a set of incantations. How can you be an assassin? Connie patted her flat chest and suggested, why don't you learn close combat magic from little Amy first?
No.
Barbara moved her hand away and shook her head in refusal. It wasn't that she didn't want to learn, she was just too embarrassed to ask. Connie continued, think about it. If you learn melee magic combined with your spatial magic, you'll definitely be the best among assassins. You'll be able to appear anywhere without any warning and have the ability to attack instantly. Chapter 2143. High Priestess, I'm a little tired. I want to go back and rest, Sally said softly beside Helena. Helena looked at her for a while before nodding. Go ahead. Sally got up and left the bustling meeting hall before leaving the city lord's castle. Walking in the cold wind of the winter night, there were no pedestrians on the road, and the long streets seemed rather lonely. It was a familiar, yet unfamiliar city. That day, she mustered up her courage to leave the forest and come all the way to this city. She originally had the heart to travel the continent, but she eventually stopped at a small restaurant. Now that she thought about it, it seemed that she only lived for herself during that period of time in her life. I wonder, are they doing well? Sally looked toward the south of the city, with hesitation on her face. After a long time, she still walked toward the south. Meg returned to the restaurant early and prepared all kinds of ingredients. Not long after, the ladies came one after another. Uncle Meg. Anna ran into the restaurant and jumped into Meg's arms. Meg carried the little one and spun 2 rounds. He looked at Anna, who had grown a little taller, and said with a smile, Little Anna, have you been happy recently? Anna nodded obediently. I just miss your cooking, little Amy and big sister, and then eat more later. Little Amy and the rest should be back soon. Meg smiled and scratched the little one's nose. She was still so obedient and sensible.
Boss.
Shirley nodded slightly to Meg with a beautiful smile on her face. Sit for a while first. We'll start eating when they're back. Meg nodded with a smile. He was a little surprised by Shirley's aura. He hadn't seen her for half a month, and she had already successfully broken through to the 9th tier. Shirley nodded and sat at the side. Anna followed behind Meg and helped Meg. She was a qualified chef. Princess, is boss really back? Little Amy is back too? Phyllis's voice sounded outside the door as she followed Irina in. Your Highness. Shirley stood up and bowed to Irina. Irina looked at Shirley and also looked surprised. She said, You've broken through. I was lucky to have a breakthrough last night. Shirley nodded. Wow. Shirley, aren't you a magician of the 9th rank now? That's amazing. Phyllis, who had followed them in, looked at Shirley in amazement. Among the younger generation of the elves, apart from the princess, Shirley was the strongest. Even Sally, who had become the princess of the elves, was still a grade 8 mage. Compared to the princess, I'm still far behind, Shirley said humbly. Boss, you're finally back. However, Phyllis's attention was attracted by the delicious food on the table and Meg, who was busy in the kitchen. She lifted her skirt and ran to the kitchen excitedly. Seeing that Phyllis was about to give him a hug, Meg glanced at Irina, who seemed to be smiling. Meg decisively picked up the oil pan at the side and said at the same time, Be careful, the oil pan is hot. Phyllis hurriedly slammed on the brakes. She looked at Meg with a red face. She was 30% excited and 70% shy. She didn't expect that she would run over and hug Boss in a moment of excitement. Phyllis, have you been cooking well recently? Meg asked casually as he poured the hot oil on the head of the steamed fish with diced hot red peppers. The red chopped peppers danced in the sizzling hot oil, injecting soul into the fish head. The fresh aroma filled the air. I've been in charge of improving the food of the night elves. Now, the cafeteria can provide eggplant with garlic sauce and mapo tofu every day. These are everyone's favorite dishes. Also, we can eat hot congee with pork and century egg in the morning, Phyllis said with a nod. Very good. You've done well in bringing delicious food to more people. Meg looked at Phyllis with admiration. This was his original intention of teaching Phyllis how to cook. Phyllis's face turned even redder, but she couldn't hide her smile. There was nothing more delightful than being praised by Mr. Mag. I've been helping Big Sister Phyllis at the textile factory recently. I even taught them how to cut vegetables, Anna said as she raised her little hand. Little Anna is also very good, Meg said with a nod. Yes, Uncle Meg is very good. I learned from Uncle Meg, Anna said with a smile. Oh yes, boss, is there anything I can help you with? Phyllis asked Meg as she looked at him. She hadn't been to the cafeteria for a long time. If the princess hadn't told her that the boss and the others were back and that they were gathering tonight, she would have come to help. No need. Just bring this steamed fish head with diced hot red peppers out. The dishes are all ready. We're just waiting for everyone to arrive. Meg shook his head with a smile. Mr. Meg, you're finally back. Meg had just removed his apron and walked out of the kitchen when an excited voice was heard. A figure had already pounced on him. Before he could react, she had already pounced on him and wrapped her legs around him skillfully. Oh, this damned softness seems to have grown a little. From the familiar softness on her face and the faint fragrance, Meg already knew who she was. It's not suitable for children. Barbara, who had just entered, reached out her hand to cover Connie's eyes. Then, she looked at Gina's turbulent waves with envy. I'm already an adult. Connie shrunk her head and wanted to see what was going on. Gina, don't stop. Before Irina exploded, Meg quickly released Gina, who was wrapped around him, and stood at attention, keeping an arm's distance away. Mr. Meg, I missed you guys so much. Gina looked at Meg with a blushing face. Her face was filled with joy and excitement. Gina was good in everything. She was a good, obedient, and pure girl. It was just that the way she expressed herself was a little too direct. It couldn't be helped. Girls who grew up in the deep sea were just so naive and sweet. Luckily, she met such a great and upright man like him. Otherwise, she would have been eaten up long ago. Yes, I missed you guys too. Meg nodded with a smile. His gaze swept across the place without leaving a trace. Yes, it was indeed getting bigger. Then, he looked at Barbara, who had just walked in through the door. She was still mediocre. It looked like the moon's gravity was indeed not enough. Or could it be that children who grew up eating seafood had more protein? Is there barbecue tonight? Barbara's gaze was already attracted by the barbecue skewers that were piled up into a meat mountain. Her eyes were sparkling. Why is she here too? Camilla's expression became a little nervous when she saw Irina when she walked in. She was clearly with Alex today. Why was she at Amy's? Was she here to freeload? We're back. Amy skipped in through the door. Then, she jumped into the arms of the young ladies one by one and kissed them on their cheeks. Then, she announced with satisfaction, "Let's start our feast." Chapter 2144. This was indeed a feast. The table was filled with dishes and almost emptied the restaurant's menu. Meanwhile, the meat skewers piled up like a mountain at the side were even more exciting. When Amy, Mia, and the rest returned from the ice cream shop, everyone in the restaurant was present. They had been separated for some time, so they naturally had to exchange greetings. Meanwhile, Connie, who had become the great chief of the orcs, became the target of everyone's teasing and teasing. After all, this little girl was so gentle and lovely when she first came to the restaurant. Who would have thought that not only would she become the chief of the Fok tribe, but she would also become the great chief of the orcs now? Big sister Connie, when I go to the orcs in the future, I just have to mention your name, and I can do whatever I want, right? Amy looked at Connie curiously and even imitated Crab to walk sideways. If I don't mention my name, will anyone be able to stop Connie from walking sideways? Connie asked with a smile. Everyone laughed as well. Come to think of it, Amy was the real little genius. All right, let's sit down and talk, Meg said, and sat down first. Irina sat down beside him. Although she didn't interact with him, she acted like the hostess. Amy climbed onto her high stool, and the other girls also sat down one after another. The large round table was now full. This was the last time Amy's was so lively. After all, ever since Meg and the rest left Chaos City for Rodu, the restaurant had been closed, and it was especially quiet. There was good food and wine, and everyone ate and drank to their heart's content. However, no one mentioned the series of events that happened at the city lord's castle today. Camilla looked at Meg and asked, "Is the restaurant going to resume business?" The ladies also quietened down and looked at Meg. The restaurant was closed for 2 weeks. This was a long break that they had never had before. Soon, all the races would declare a state of war to fully protect the Alliance's northern expedition. At this time, it was obviously not suitable to continue traveling with the children. No, Amy's holiday is still in 2 weeks. I plan to wait for her to start school before reopening. Meg shook his head with a smile. What was interesting was that the employees of Amy's were now closely linked to the fate of the Norland continent. Whether it was Connie, who was going to lead the orcs northward, Camilla, who was going to become the leader of the vampires, or Barbara, who was going to build the sealing spell formation, all of them had important roles to play. Is that so? That's good. I still want to take some time off, Barbara said vaguely as she bit into the meat skewer. Connie looked at Meg with a serious expression and said, "But it's not too safe outside. Boss, it's better if you don't bring Xiaomi and on a long trip. It's not safe." Camilla nodded and said, "That is indeed the case." Although it was a little despicable of Meg to watch her photo stone for the entire night, other than that, he was a nice person. He cooked well and got along well with everyone. Yabamia put down the bowl in her hand and asked Connie with concern, "Did something happen?" "Let's not go on long trips for the next few days. It's good to stay in Chaos City," Connie said. Yabamia hesitated and asked, "Then will Elizabeth be in danger?" Connie looked at Camilla with an unnatural expression. The news about Rankster had been brought up many times during the meeting today. Elizabeth had not been found yet. This was the news that the great elder of the Frost Dragon tribe, Douglas, had revealed personally and hoped that the other tribes could provide some help. As colleagues and friends, they were naturally concerned about Elizabeth's safety. Yabamia and Elizabeth were inseparable and had the closest relationship. If she knew about Elizabeth's current situation, she would be very worried. "She's a smart lady. She'll be fine," Irina said. Upon hearing that, Yabamia relaxed a lot. She nodded at Irina with a smile and said, "Thank you. It's rare for us to gather together today. Everyone has already started to leave this small restaurant, and we don't know when the next time will be. Come, Let's eat and drink to our heart's content. Meg raised his glass with a smile.
Cheers.
Everyone raised their glasses and then clinked them with a smile. In the square, a figure was staring at the brightly lit Amy's in a daze. Although she couldn't see the people in the restaurant and couldn't hear their chatter, the warm lights still made her feel warm in this cold night. A faint smile appeared on Sally's face. Even though she couldn't go in, she could sense the energy emanating from it just by looking at it from the outside. She turned and prepared to leave. The restaurant's door opened. "Since you're back, why don't you come in for a drink?" A gentle voice sounded, and Sally stopped in her tracks. After hesitating for a while, Sally turned around and looked at the figure standing at the door. That gentle smile still made her feel at ease, and that pair of clear eyes made it hard for her to refuse. A smile bloomed on her cold face like a flower. It turned out that someone was waiting for her return. This feeling was really good. Aisha. Yabamiya walked to the door and saw Sally standing outside. Her eyes lit up, and then she flew over and hugged her. She said happily, "You're finally back." Sally was a little unaccustomed to Yabamiya's enthusiasm, but the warm feeling of being held in Yabamiya's arms immediately warmed her heart. "Sister Aisha." Amy also ran out with a drumstick in her hand. She opened her arms and ran to Sally, but when she saw Aisha in her snow-white dress and her slightly oily hands, she stopped in time. "Here, a warm beggar's drumstick that just came out of the shell. Here you go." Sally looked at the drumstick in the little girl's hand and felt a little touched. The little girl treasured food the most. Smelling the tempting roast chicken aroma and looking at the oily drumstick, her throat moved a little. Only then did she remember that she hadn't eaten anything today. "It's super delicious. This is the only one left. You can have it all." Amy stood on her tiptoes and tried to raise the drumstick higher. "Thank you, Amy." Sally took the drumstick and took a bite. The crispy skin wrapped around the fat and tender chicken. When she took a bite, the crispy taste blossomed in her mouth, and the smooth and tender chicken meat jumped out uncontrollably. Her taste buds went crazy. She hadn't tasted anything worthy of being called delicious in a long, long time, and this drumstick evoked all her memories of Amy's. This warm place was also a place rich in delicious food. Oh, there was a person who was good at creating delicious food, and a group of warm people. She looked at the familiar and unfamiliar people standing at the door of the restaurant, but when they stood together, they were as warm as a family. Chapter 2145. Sally, who had just eaten a drumstick, couldn't resist everyone's enthusiasm, so she walked into the restaurant. Then, her gaze landed on Irina, who was sitting at the dining table. She paused in her steps, looking a little surprised and a little embarrassed. Camilla looked at the two of them with a strange expression. Barbara and Connie also had similar expressions. They knew their identities, and it was indeed a little awkward to meet in such an occasion. "I'll add a seat for you." Irina took out a foldable chair and placed it in an empty space at the side. "Thank you." Sally nodded slightly. Her expression relaxed immediately, and she sat down on the foldable chair. "Sister Aisha." Anna went forward and looked at Sally happily. "Little Anna has grown taller too," Sally said with a smile as she touched Anna's head. "I haven't thanked you for what happened last time." Shirley sat down beside Sally and looked at her sincerely. "Thank you. You're welcome." Sally nodded slightly. She looked at Shirley and opened her mouth, but she didn't say anything. "This is Aisha, the restaurant's second employee and also the restaurant's second customer after the opening." Meg introduced her to everyone, and also the restaurant's new employee to Sally. In Mama's, she was still Aisha, at least tonight. As expected of a woman who can become a princess. She's not simple at all. Camilla was secretly surprised by the two women's magnanimity. They could actually meet without any enmity and even sit at the same table to eat. This banquet only ended when all the barbecued meat was finished at midnight. Meg stood at the door and looked at everyone who left. He smiled and said, "I hope that all of you will have a bright future, but I also hope that all of you can be happy. No matter where you are or what kind of person you become, mamas will always be here. The door will always be open to all of you." The ladies looked at him and smiled. Their smiling faces were brighter and more beautiful than the starry sky. Meg stood at the door and watched the ladies leave. "Looks like you're really popular with girls." Irina's voice came from behind him. "If you're talking about culinary skills, then I admit that this is indeed a talent that can't be hidden." Meg turned around and sighed softly. "What if I'm talking about your mouth?" Meg frowned and shook his head. "That doesn't make sense. Other than you, no one should know that I'm good at talking." Irina was stunned for a moment. She suddenly understood something and blushed. She hit his chest with her hand and rebuked, glib tongue. "Very pertinent." Meg nodded and closed the door. This was a farewell banquet for those who were about to enter the battlefield, including Meg himself. This was a war that Meg couldn't control. They were going to face the powerful Cthulhu, as well as Rankster and the million-strong undead army under his control. Many people would die in this war.
No one could guarantee who would die.
Connie would personally lead the orc army to the north. Camilla would also be in the vampires' battle order. Barbara would follow her master to the front line to set up the array formation. Shirley had already applied to join the Night Elves battle force. Gina would follow Lantist to the battle. Sally would definitely follow the Elven army to the battle. Meg would fight alongside them, just that he wouldn't be the boss this time. How magical! When Meg came to this world, he only thought about how to drag his broken body and survive in this damn world with Amy. But now, he had to save this world with his friends from the restaurant. "Are you confident?" Irina asked softly behind him as she looked at Meg, who was standing by the window in a daze. Meg turned around and smiled at Irina. "I'm still far from the Manchu Han imperial feast that I promised Amy. What about me?" Meg reached out and held her waist gently. "I think Amy is sensible now. When we come back, I'll give her a little brother or sister." Irina blushed and was a little angry. She looked up and met his affectionate and gentle gaze. Her heart trembled, and she nodded subconsciously.
"Seems like you had a good rest."
Sally had just returned to the courtyard of the Elven diplomatic mission in the city lord's castle when Helena's voice came from the room with the door open at the side. Sally's expression changed instantly. She hesitated for a while, but still walked into Helena's room. Helena looked at her and went straight to the point. "Let me ask you, do you want to stay in the forest or go to the north?" "Go to the north." Sally didn't hesitate at all. "I need someone to look after the rear." "That person can't be me?" "Very good. If your father had half of your courage, he wouldn't have ended up like this." Helena nodded with satisfaction. Sally remained silent.
She didn't want to talk about that man.
In the courtyard next door, in the study with the doors and windows closed, Andre looked at Dominic, who was sitting opposite him, and said in a low voice, "Alex has chosen you to be his assistant, so he will definitely ask you about the art of war and tactics. You have to preserve the Roth Empire's strength as much as possible. Those who are not of our race are bound to have different intentions."
This is an ancient saying.
Dominic was silent for a while before nodding. "Yes, Your Majesty." Andre was also silent for a long time before he said, "If you meet Josh on the battlefield, kill him. Don't leave him alive." "Your Majesty." Dominic was a little shocked, but he quickly nodded. "Yes." The next morning, Meg came to the city lord's castle for a meeting with Dominic. Just as Meg had expected, the Roth Empire had already prepared 2 sets of war plans for the northern expedition before the meeting. One was a war plan for the Roth Empire to fight alone if the negotiations failed. The other was a detailed war plan for the various races after they joined forces. Moreover, the Roth Empire had very detailed information about the polar ice plains, including a newly drawn topographic map that had detailed markings on every mountain range and canyon. Meg looked through the detailed battle plan carefully before putting it down. "You and I both know that this is not the best plan." Meg looked at Dominic and shook his head in disappointment. Dominic was silent for a while before he nodded. "This is the plan that was prepared beforehand. Marshal, you're not suited to lying." Meg smiled. This is the plan that was modified last night, right? In order to reduce the losses of the Roth Empire's cavalry, there are many loopholes that are fatal to the Alliance army. Dominic's expression stiffened. I am very disappointed. Meg shook his head. You should be clear that when you wrote this plan, you are no longer just the marshal of the Roth Empire. You are the marshal of the entire Alliance army. No matter what race they are from, they are your soldiers now. They are all fighting to protect this world. Chapter 2146. There were only 2 people in the spacious meeting hall, but the atmosphere was a little tense. Mag looked at Dominic calmly. This marshal of the Empire was lowering his head slightly at this moment. I know this is what he wants. As the marshal of the Empire, you can't reject this request. Meg broke the silence. He looked at Dominic and said, however, Marshal, you are now the deputy commander of the Alliance army. You bear the heavy responsibility of leading the Alliance army to protect the Norland continent. You are no longer just the marshal of the Roth Empire. Dominic looked up at Meg. Before we became soldiers, we swore to be knights. We should protect the weak. This is what you said to me when we first met. Meg looked at Dominic. Now that all the races are sincerely sending their troops to the Roth Empire and forming an alliance army to go north, if the Roth Empire still upholds the principle of empire supremacy, I will not accept it. I didn't manage to do what I lectured you all back then. It is really a little ironic. Dominic laughed self-deprecatingly. Then, he stood up with a serious expression. I will resign from my position as the Marshal of the Roth Empire and participate in this war as the Deputy Commander of the Alliance Army.
I will do my best.
Meg also stood up and looked at Dominic. Happy working with you, Marshal. Rodu, Romo Street. Saipan Tavern. A lady in a black Lolita stood at the entrance of the tavern. She looked up at the signboard and then at the tightly shut door with a disappointed expression. 3 silver coins. After struggling for 2 days, Vicky finally came to Romo Street with the note. Only when one was in charge would one know how expensive food was. Vicky only understood this recently. It couldn't be helped. The people in Rodu didn't know what opera was at all, let alone spend dozens of copper coins to watch an opera performance. Of course, the poor condition of the opera house was also one of the reasons. When she recruited the team members, she was very ambitious and drew a huge pie for them. Now, they couldn't even eat the crumbs. All of them were so hungry that they looked sallow and emaciated this morning. 5 team members left a letter and left without saying goodbye. They went to the Marcus Singers, where they could eat and sleep, and that was enough of an attraction. Today, Pascal had used money to humiliate her and seduce the other members. This was the reason why she had decided to come here. When had she ever suffered such grievances? Compared to Pascal and the wretched playboy, the uncle who could appreciate their performance was simply too amiable. If he had to make a choice, he would definitely choose that uncle. From his attitude towards the 2 little girls, it could be seen that he was not a bad person. However, the tavern was closed, and there was a closed notice hanging on the door. Sigh, Vicky sighed. She touched the few copper coins she had left after buying breakfast for her team members. If she only ate porridge, she could survive for a few more days. However, if 5 of them left today and another 5 left tomorrow, she would become a general without an army in a few days. A year's worth of hard work had been completely wasted. She was too ashamed to face the members whose dreams had been ignited by her. Hello, are you here for a drink? A voice sounded from behind Vicky. Vicky turned around and saw a girl with delicate features. She was about 15 or 16 years old. I'm here to look for the uncle at the tavern. It seems that he's not here. Vicky shook her head and was a little disappointed. Are you Vicky? Mara asked tentatively. Vicky's eyes lit up. She looked at Mara carefully and said, You know me? Have you seen any of our performances? Performance? I haven't seen it. Mara shook her head. I see. Vicky was a little hurt. Then how do you know my name? It's my master. He told me to keep an eye out for a girl who might come looking for him in the next 2 days. Mara smiled and said, I just saw you standing at the door for a while. You looked like you had something on, so I came to ask.
I see.
Vicky nodded. She didn't think that the uncle would really take what happened before to heart. Then when will he be back?
I do have something to talk to him about.
Vicky asked. He said he'll be away for a few days, but he didn't say when he'll be back. Vicky was a little disappointed. If it was another 2 days, the members would probably all leave.
Thank you.
Vicky and Mara nodded and turned to leave. She had to walk around the streets and see if she could find a way to make money, or sell 1 or 2 of the things she brought from home. Perhaps she had already sold most of the things that could be sold, and the rest were things that couldn't be sold or couldn't be sold. Sigh, just a single cent is enough to make this young miss worry to death.
Wait.
Mara called out to Vicky.
Huh?
Vicky looked at Mara in confusion. My master asked me to give you something before he left. He also asked me to take you to a place, Mara said. What is it? Vicky's heart was filled with anticipation. I'm not sure. Wait for me. Mara jogged back to Titan Tavern. Soon, she came out with an oiled paper bag and handed it to Vicky. Vicky took the heavy paper bag, looked at Mara and opened it. There was a black money bag, a bunch of keys, and a letter. Vicky opened the money bag first. The 50 shiny silver coins lit up her eyes. Then, she picked up the bunch of keys, a little confused. Let's go. I'll take you to that place, Mara said as she walked forward. Vicky hurriedly put away the things and quickly followed. Soon, Mara stopped in front of a house. It was a 2-story building. Compared to the houses on both sides, it was twice as big and taller. The 2-story building was as tall as the 3-story building on the side. The plaque on the door had long been removed. The slightly old door looked a little dusty, probably because no one had come in or out for a long time. What's this? Vicky looked at Mara in confusion. Master didn't tell me anything. Mara shrugged and looked at the key in her hand. But you can try to open it. Vicky went forward, picked up the dusty padlock, inserted the key, and twisted it gently.
Click.
With the crisp sound of a spring, the padlock was opened. Mara pushed the door open and light shone in. A spacious hall appeared in her sight. Dusty benches were casually piled up in the corner. But what attracted Mara's attention was the stage in the hall. Rays of light fell on the stage from the windows in the front and back of the room. The dust floated, but it also illuminated her dreams. Chapter 2147. Vicky stood at the door in a daze, her big bright eyes full of surprise. Mara took a look at the circus theater that had been closed for a long time. Miss had taken her here when she was little, but it had been closed for 2 or 3 years. But why was this beautiful lady so happy to see this old theater? Can I go in and take a look? Vicky looked back at Mara and asked. Mara nodded. Master has given you the key, so I don't think he will stop you from entering. Thank you, Vicky said, and walked into the theater eagerly. Her black leather boots kicked up a layer of dust on the ground, but Vicky didn't care. She looked around as if she had found a treasure. The spacious hall was more than 300 square meters, and the floor was about 6 meters high. It looked very spacious. There were many windows in the front and back, allowing light to enter the theater. The stage was directly connected to the second level. While it was more transparent, it also received more light. There were a few ropes above the stage, and claw marks could be seen everywhere on the stage. This must be a circus theater, and a specially built one. It looks so good. Vicky was full of love. This was her dream theater. Of course, this was a twisted dream after being beaten by reality countless times. It could shelter the guests from the wind and rain, had a decent stage, seats for the guests, and a small window for selling tickets. That was enough. And this theater could satisfy all of her needs. Although it looked dusty at the moment, it was already sparkling in her eyes. Is that gentleman planning to rent this place to us? Vicky asked Mara, who was standing at the door. Maybe he said so in his letter, Mara reminded. Vicky quickly took the letter out of the bag and took out the letter. Hello, Miss Vicky. I'm glad that you can read this letter. It means that you have considered my proposal. Artists can't live and perform in a decent manner. This is the sorrow of the times. Here are 50 silver coins. It's a small token of my appreciation. I hope it can solve your current problem. I have also prepared Building 101 for you. If you are satisfied, this can be your performance venue. Of course, as a businessman, I hope to invest in your future. I will take 10% of the annual profits of the Black Cat Opera House as a reward and will not participate in anything else. I hope you can consider it carefully. If you agree, you can move into Building 101 directly. If you can't accept this condition, you can return the key to Mara. Hades. A short and concise letter. Vicky read it carefully twice, feeling conflicted. Are you stupid? Do you still need to consider such a kind angel investor? Isn't it much better than that stinky man who lusts after our bodies? Vicky suddenly said in a slightly irritated manner. Huh. Mara was stunned and looked at Vicky in surprise. She even scolded herself. Vicky clenched the key in her hand tightly, as if she had grabbed onto a life-saving straw, and her gaze became resolute. Black Cat Opera House, let's start anew here. I must let everyone know that the best opera house in the world is here. Vicky composed herself and walked out of the theater. Then, she showed the letter to Mara and said, Mr. Hades has lent this building to us temporarily. We will open the best opera house here in the future. You want to open an opera house here? Mara's eyes lit up. Then, she asked in confusion, what is an opera? Vicky's expression fell. This was the current situation of opera in Rodu. Leader, Lousy, and Abao have left too. Vicky pushed open the door and walked into the dilapidated courtyard. A middle-aged man said in a low voice. The other actors also looked at Vicky worriedly. After seeing that she was empty-handed, they couldn't hide their disappointment. If this goes on, our Black Cat Song troupe will really break up. A thin and tanned girl clenched her fists and said angrily, they are too heartless. If it weren't for our leader, they would have starved to death. Now they have betrayed us. The others were silent, and their expressions were a little complicated. The weather still didn't show any signs of warming up. Their stomachs were never full. If this went on, they didn't know if they could survive this winter. Vicky glanced at everyone and raised her beautiful eyebrows. She looked a little angry. She reached out to take the black money bag from her waist, pulled the string, and slammed it on the table. She said loudly, why are you all looking so sad? Isn't it just money? Look at what this is. The shiny silver coins shone with a dazzling light. Pairs of eyes in the room lit up. The troupe members looked at the money bag on the table in disbelief. This, leader, where did this money come from? The middle-aged man asked in a trembling voice. Leader, you didn't sell yourself, did you? The tanned and skinny girl said with a sorrowful expression. Hearing that, the troupe members looked at Vicky with concern and anxiety. They all knew that the rich young master had been pestering their leader. Their leader had never been nice to him. But other than him, they really couldn't think of where their leader had gotten so much money. Sell what? Even if I sold you, I wouldn't sell myself. Vicky rolled her eyes, and then smiled. This money was given by the uncle who came to watch our performance last time. Not only did he give us money, he also provided us with the venue of the opera house. I've already agreed to work with him. Our hard days are over. Really? We have a new opera house? We're finally leaving this place. Everyone was surprised and overjoyed. They were so excited that some of them couldn't help but cry. Vicky looked at everyone and smiled. Her eyes turned red. She turned her face to wipe her tears and said, Okay, I've called for 3 carriages to wait outside. Hurry up and pack your things and move. I'll bring you all to eat good food later. Okay. Everyone agreed. They took their few belongings and extinguished the fire in the house. Then they went out. Impressive. This is too awesome. This stage. I love it, I love it. Outside Building 101, the troupe members looked at the open door of the opera house with their mouths agape. They couldn't hide their shock. Vicky looked at the remaining 8 troupe members and couldn't help but blame herself. If she hadn't been so stubborn yesterday and came to look for the uncle earlier, then all of them would be here today. She didn't blame the troupe members who left. It was true love for them to be able to stay with her until now. It was normal for them to not be able to hold on. Drinking water really wasn't enough to fill one's stomach. From today onwards, this is our home. Let's start afresh. Vicky looked at the troupe members and said with a smile. Okay. The troupe members responded with a smile. Everyone carried their luggage into the opera house and went out to have a simple meal. They couldn't wait to find the cleaning tools in the opera house's utility room and started cleaning. Vicky found a wooden board, wiped it clean, and wrote a line of words with a pen. Then, she hung it outside the door. Black Cat Opera House. Chapter 2148. As an unqualified commander, Meg relied on the experience he inherited from Alex and had a deep discussion and plan with Dominic. The scale of this war was huge, and it involved many types of soldiers. The situation was very complicated, and it was even more exaggerated than the racial war back then. The racial war back then was just 2 to 3 races killing each other. It looked like a mess, but there weren't many large-scale wars. Furthermore, the Allied army was formed at the last minute. They might not even be able to trust each other, let alone have a tacit understanding. Dominic looked at Meg's defensive formation on the sand table with a frown and said, with such an arrangement, once the defense line falls, it will be very difficult to control the situation. With a 1,000,000-strong undead army charging fearlessly, a simple defense line won't be able to hold them off. Hence, I plan to make an opening in these 3 canyons and let them in. We'll split the 1,000,000-strong undead army and then stretch out the battle line. We'll set up artillery battalions and magic casters on both sides of the canyons to kill the undead army as much as possible. We'll set up a pocket-shaped encirclement at the exit of the canyons and set up spell formations and a large number of soldiers to guard it. The giant dragon army will go forward and kill the undead army in advance with their air superiority. However, our ultimate goal is to lure Cthulhu into the spell formation and seal it. Once Cthulhu is successfully sealed, the undead army will be leaderless, and the crisis will be resolved. Meg fiddled with the sand table and came up with a new formation. Dominic's eyes lit up. He circled the sand table twice, and then frowned, and said, with such an arrangement, we can stop the undead army for a while, but how can we lure Cthulhu into the seal? Demons were mysterious and unpredictable. If not for the fact that the seal outside Chaos City had been lifted, they wouldn't even know that such a terrifying existence was sealed on the Norland continent. They had a long lifespan, which was even longer than the existence of a race. Even the giant dragons, who had a long lifespan, knew nothing about this. They had terrifying abilities. They couldn't be killed, and they couldn't even be severely injured. Only a sealing spell formation passed down from ancient times could reseal them. However, this was a very difficult task. In its eyes, their scheme was probably nothing more than a joke. I wonder if you've heard of the 1,000-layer cake theory? Meg asked. 1,000-layer cake? Dominic shook his head. This sounded like a theory about food. What was that? A mysterious smile appeared on Meg's face. Cthulhu has existed for countless years, and its intelligence must be far beyond our imagination. However, no matter how intelligent it is, it still has to think when faced with the trap that we set up. He probably saw that this was a trap, so he's on the 2nd floor. He thinks we're on the 1st floor, but we're actually on the 5th floor. When the time comes, Mag smiled. I'll leave the deployment of the troops to you, and leave the matter of the traps to me. My only request for you is to eliminate the 200,000 undead army and ensure that the blockade line is not broken through. All right. Dominic nodded seriously. If he didn't even have this bit of confidence, then he would have wasted his decades as the Grand Marshal of the Empire. Meg went to see Michael to find out about the progress of the cannons. With Miss Hill's full support, the daily production of cannons has reached 300 cannons and 5,000 shells. We have also successfully contacted the dwarves. 50 technicians have arrived with the blueprints yesterday. They will supply the cannons with all their might. The goblins have also promised to supply all the materials needed for the shells. After the dwarves' cannons are mass-produced, Chaos City will focus on producing the shells and shut down the cannons production line, Michael explained as he brought Meg around the cannons production workshop. Miss Hill, you're really broad-minded. Meg nodded. His impression of Miss Hill went up a notch again. Ambitious people emerged in troubled times. Although Miss Hill was a woman, she was very broad-minded and had great foresight. The train that was opened previously had become the best tool for transporting ores. The freight trains travel between Vic Mountain and Chaos City, and their efficiency had increased tremendously. If it wasn't for the current chaotic situation and the enemy, all the races would definitely pay attention to this smooth transportation route. As long as the Norland continent could survive this wave, the train would definitely become the driving force for development in the next 100 years of peace. If you want to be rich, you have to build roads first. This was an existence akin to the truth. Meanwhile, Miss Hill had buffet banks in her hands. She also had the advantage of being the first to strike. She even had the core technology of the steam engine in her hands. She was simply an excellent money-making tool. Meg even imagined himself lying on the shoulders of giants in the future and living a life of financial freedom.
Yes.
In troubled times, women are not inferior to men. Michael nodded with emotion. Not only Miss Hill, Miss Gloria from Family Moraton came to the City Lord's castle the other day and said that she wanted to donate a large number of combat cotton-padded clothes to the Alliance Army. Gloria's? Meg raised his eyebrows. Speaking of which, he hadn't seen that lady who liked to eat tofu pudding for some time. It was noon when he came out of the City Lord's castle. The sun shone on his face, and it was a little glaring. The snow had almost melted, and the tips of the willow trees at the side had a little green. It seemed like spring was coming soon. Alex. A surprised voice sounded. Meg retracted his gaze and looked at the knight standing in front of him who was leading a black donkey. He had a square face and an emerald sword at his waist. His smile was simple and honest, and his eyes were bright and spirited. Conti Nicholas. His name appeared in Meg's mind immediately. Speaking of which, he hadn't seen him for a few months. He looked a little tanned, and there was a thin and long scar on the left side of his face. It looked like it was left behind by a magic beast's claw. There were many scuffs on his armor, and it wasn't as shiny as before. However, only that pair of eyes were still cool and spirited, like a bright young man. "Hello, I'm Alex," Meg said to him. "I heard that you're not slaying dragons anymore, and are now slaying demons. Is that true?" Connie asked excitedly as he looked at Meg. "That's the plan recently." Meg nodded slightly. "In that case, I can only join Chaos City's Northern Expedition Army to fight alongside you," Connie said with a simple and honest smile. Meg looked at him, and then at the black donkey he was leading. He smiled and said, "The donkey is not bad." Connie reached out to stroke the black donkey's head and smilingly said, "It's a new partner, but it is indeed not bad." Chapter 2149. "Father, are we going to stay in Chaos City or go to Rodu?" Amy asked Meg as she sat on a stool at the entrance of the kitchen while he was cooking in the kitchen. She was stroking the cat with one hand as she looked at Meg. "What do you think, Megs?" Meg asked with a smile. Amy thought about it seriously and said, "We can play with Big Sister Mia and the rest in Chaos City, and we can also look for Jessica and Daphne. It's more fun than Rodu." That's indeed the case. Meg nodded. Apart from the variety of food in Rodu, it wasn't that fun for the two children. However, he still needed a reliable worker before he could get rid of the Saipan Tavern completely. However, as the supreme commander of the Allied army, he really didn't have the time to care if the Saipan Tavern's customers would run away because the boss stood them up. However, we can watch Miss Black Cat in Rodu. Big Sister's performance is so good. I want to see more. Amy pouted as she stroked Ugly Duckling's chubby face, feeling a little conflicted. Right at this moment, someone knocked on the door. "I'll go open the door." Amy put down Ugly Duckling and ran to the door with her short legs. Then, she stood on her tiptoes and opened the door with some effort. Two tall figures blocked the door. Amy looked up, and her expression changed slightly when she saw who it was. She exclaimed, "Master, is school starting already?" It was Crassus and Julian. "Hee, it's still early. Little Amy, don't be nervous. We're just here to check on your recent studies and see if you've been slacking off during the holidays." Crassus smiled kindly. "That's right." Julian nodded. Amy pouted and mumbled sadly, "Shouldn't we eat and play during the holidays? Why do we have to work hard? I don't want to work hard anymore." Her eyes reddened as she spoke, and tears welled up in her big eyes as if they could fall at any time. Crassus and Julian's expressions stiffened slightly. Obviously, they didn't have any good ideas in the face of the little guy's shameless whining. Don't cry. Master was just joking. We haven't seen little Amy in a long time, so we wanted to come and see you." Crassus quickly waved his hand and elbowed Julian. "Don't you agree, Julian?" Urian elbowed him discreetly, but still nodded in the end. "Is that really the case?" Amy looked up at the two of them and immediately revealed a cute smile. She raised her little hand and said, "I missed you guys so much too, Master." "Really?" Crassus and Julian couldn't help but smile when they saw the smile on their young disciple's face. Meg came out of the kitchen to welcome them. He looked at the two and said, "Masters, you're here. Come in and have a seat. You haven't eaten yet, right? I'm cooking. Why don't you sit down and eat together?" "Let's eat." "Yeah, what a coincidence. We haven't eaten either." "It would be a little embarrassing if we ate together," Crassus said as he sat down at the table. Julian glanced at him and frowned. He also sat down at the table. "Then sit down for a while. There are still 2 dishes that aren't ready." Meg poured them a glass of water and continued to cook in the kitchen. The two of them had always been at loggerheads. Something must have happened for them to visit together today. Meg listened to the movements outside as he cooked. "Little Amy, come over here." Crassus beckoned Amy over. He held her little hand and looked her up and down for a while. He nodded with satisfaction. "Although you don't seem to have improved, your face has become a little rounder. You look even cuter." Julian rolled his eyes. He reached out a finger and gently tapped Amy's forehead. A snowflake bloomed between her eyebrows, then quickly turned into an ice crystal and floated up. "Not bad. After a while, you'll be able to use your real domain." Julian withdrew his hand and looked at the 5-star ice crystal. He nodded with satisfaction. "I've been working hard on my cultivation every day." Amy listened to the two masters' praise and said with a smile. Meg also smiled in the kitchen. Although the little girl liked to eat and sleep, she did consciously work hard on her cultivation for 2 to 3 hours every day. Compared to the little buns her age, she could be called a little model worker. Crassus praised Amy again, making her very happy. "Little Amy, Master has a few things for you. You have to keep them well." Crassus took out a green space bracelet. With a flick of his finger, a photo stone and a thick book appeared on the table. Amy picked up the photo stone and looked at it. Then, she picked up the thick book and looked at it for a while. She asked, "Master, what's this?" "This photo stone contains some magic tutorials that Master has recorded for you. This book is written by Master himself. It's about close combat magic. It's the only book in the world," Crassus explained with a smile.
"Oh."
Amy nodded. She looked at the 2 items curiously, but soon put them down. She looked up at Crassus with some panic. "Master, don't you want me any more?" In the kitchen, Meg also stopped cooking.
"How could that be?
"Little Amy is so cute. How could Master bear to not want you?" Crassus shook his head. "Then why are you giving me these things? Don't you want to teach little Amy magic?" "Little Amy will be very diligent. Don't give up on little Amy, okay?" Amy looked at Crassus anxiously. Tears were already welling up in her eyes. "It's not like that, little Amy. Master is just going on a long trip. He's afraid that you won't work hard enough, so he left these 2 things for you. I hope that when Master comes back, you'll have become stronger. When that time comes, Master will personally test your hard work. Crassus smiled and patted Amy's head. Really? Amy sniffed and looked at Crassus suspiciously. It's true. Julian raised his hand, and an ice blue ring appeared on the table. There was also an ice crystal mirror in the shape of a snowflake. Little Amy, these are the things I left for you. Your affinity with ice magic is far above mine. Your future achievements will definitely surpass mine. Julian looked at Amy with a gratified smile. The most satisfying thing I've done in my life is to have you as my disciple. Then when are you coming back? Amy asked the two of them. Very soon. Maybe we'll be back by the time you start school, Crassus said with a smile. Julian nodded. A smile appeared on Amy's face again. She nodded seriously and said, Okay, then I'll work very, very hard to learn magic. When you come back, you'll definitely be surprised. Okay, then we'll wait and see, Crassus said with a smile. Masters, it's rare for us to get together. Why don't we have a drink together? Meg came out with the dishes and a bottle of Moutai from the wine cabinet. Chapter 2150. The dishes were served, and everyone took their seats, and ate quietly and obediently. Amy also put away the gifts from her two masters and began to focus on the drumstick in front of her. Thank you, masters, for teaching Amy so meticulously during this period of time. Here's a toast to you, Meg said sincerely to the two of them as he raised his glass. Then he drank it all in one gulp. Crassus and Julian were indebted to Amy for teaching her, and they also cared for the father and daughter. Meg would always remember this kindness in his heart. Today, the two of them came here with the intention of saying goodbye. Although the two of them were not present at yesterday's race meeting, they would definitely not sit by and do nothing about the northern expedition. This trip would be dangerous, so the two of them had already begun to make arrangements for their deaths. They had taught Amy everything they had learned in their lives, leaving behind a seed. We should be thanking Mr. Mac for giving us such a good disciple, Crassus said with a hearty laugh. Julian raised his glass and took a sip. Then, he looked at Meg and reminded him, Rome will forge a brand new weapon for Amy. Mr. Mac, remember to ask often.
Okay.
Meg nodded. Master Rome had mentioned this before, but there had been no news recently. Crassus added, Amy is obedient, but she's still a child after all. It's inevitable that she'll get tired. Mr. Mac, you still have to urge her often. Only the hardworking can become strong. Okay, I'll urge her to practice magic often. Meg nodded. After so many years, Meg once again experienced the feeling of being earnestly taught. Meg drank with the two of them as the student's parent. Moutai was a strong liquor. Even with Crassus and Julian's alcohol tolerance, they were still drunk after drinking a bottle. Good wine. Mr. Mac, what kind of wine is this? Crassus narrowed his eyes and asked Meg.
This is Moutai.
Take these 2 bottles. When the 2 masters come back, we'll continue drinking. Meg smiled and stuffed 2 bottles of Moutai into their arms before sending them out. The 2 of them had been fighting for their entire lives, but after they got drunk, they put their arms around each other's shoulders and staggered into the magic potion shop. Father, where are Master and the others going? Amy stood behind Meg and asked curiously. Them? They're going to save the world, Meg said with a smile. Amy's eyes lit up and she looked at Meg expectantly. Then can you bring me along? Not this time, because this is an adult matter. We can only talk about it after Amy grows up. Meg shook his head. I see. Amy pouted and sighed. She muttered softly, I really want to grow up faster. Meg smiled and patted Amy's head. He turned around and was about to go in. Mr. Mac. A loud and clear voice sounded. Meg looked up and saw a few burly men walking over quickly. The one in the lead was Sargeras. Keel, Mond, and the rest were beside him. Sargeras, whose shirt was unbuttoned, exuded a ferocious aura from the lava patterns on his body. His aura was very strong, and he had already touched the threshold of 10th tier. Director Sargeras, Meg greeted him with a smile. Mr. Mack, I didn't expect you to really come back. I thought I might not be able to see you today, Sargeras said with an honest smile as he touched his bald head. I just came back last night. Meg nodded. He looked at the big backpack on Mon's back and curiously asked, Are you going on a long trip? Or are you going to do a mission? We are going to respond to the City Lord's call to go to the far north to fight the undead army. We are going to report today. We wanted to say goodbye to you before we left. I didn't expect to really meet you, Sargeras said with a smile. Why did you suddenly decide to go to the north? Meg was a little surprised. He knew about the lava demon situation. They were relying on Sargeras and the Burning Legion. If they were to die in the north, there would be no chance for them to make a comeback. Sargeras smiled and said, If we hide at the back, who will protect you? This is what we should do. Yes. We are all going willingly to fucking undead army. Keel agreed. The members of the Burning Legion also roared with laughter, and the atmosphere became much more relaxed. Meg looked at this group of men and suddenly felt a sense of respect. Racial hatred could be put aside and personal safety could be put behind, but they still took on the chivalrous standards. The Burning Legion. At this moment, Meg was moved. Mr. Mack, thank you for your hospitality during this period. You are the benefactor of the lava demons.
Goodbye.
Sargeras hammered his chest with one hand and gave a lava demon salute. The leader of the Burning Legion and the others also saluted Meg. Meg nodded with a smile. You're welcome. Come back alive. I will give you as much Rugi ammo as you want. Sargeras and the members of the Burning Legion laughed. Burning Legion. Sargeras roared. For the Rugi ammo. The members of the Burning Legion replied in unison, and their roars shook the sky. Uncle Big Bald Head, I wish you all the best. Amy raised her little fist. Sargeras looked at Amy with a doting smile on his face. He bent down and gently bumped his fist with Amy's. He retracted his hand and was surprised to find that there was a small ring in his hand. Be sure to hit more bad guys. Amy winked at Sargeras. Sargeras smiled knowingly. He accepted Amy's small gift and left with the Burning Legion. What did Amy give Uncle Sargeras? Meg asked with a smile as he looked down at Amy. It's just a small gift. Amy turned and ran into the dining room. Meg shook his head with a smile. He also turned and closed the door. Then he went straight into the kitchen and began to stew meat and knead dough. In the evening, Meg sent 2 buckets of Rugi ammo to the temporary barracks outside the city in a carriage and asked the guards to help deliver them to Sargeras. The sun was already setting in the west, but a corner of the barracks suddenly lit up with a bright light, accompanied by the angry roars of burly men. Take this as a little blessing from me. Meg got into the carriage with a smile and ordered the coachman to return to the city. The carriage stopped in front of Amy's. As soon as Meg got out of the carriage, he saw the 2 girls standing at the door. Hill Buffett and Gloria Moreton. The 2 most sought-after business prodigies in Chaos City were standing at the entrance of Mamie Restaurant waiting for him at this moment. The atmosphere was quite harmonious. Although they were not talking and laughing, at least there was no strange atmosphere. They stood about a meter apart. Hill, in a red down jacket, looked capable and experienced. Her red lips looked even brighter in the setting sun. Just by standing there casually, she gave people a sense of oppression. Gloria, in a white down jacket and a long black sweater skirt, looked more elegant and reserved. Standing next to Hill, her aura was not inferior. Hearing the sound, the 2 girls looked up at Meg at the same time. Chapter 2151. Meg was glad that Irina wasn't home at the moment. Otherwise, even if it didn't become a battlefield, the atmosphere would inevitably be a little awkward. Miss Hill, Miss Gloria, why are you here? Meg gave the money to the coachman and then looked at the 2 with a smile. It had to be said that whether it was appearance or temperament, these 2 were first-class existences. Although they were still a little lacking compared to Irina, each had their own charm. We heard that Mr. Meg is coming back today, so we came to visit. At the entrance of the restaurant, we happened to meet Miss Gloria, who was also looking for Mr. Meg, so we waited here together. Hill said with a smile. Mr. Meg, long time no see. Gloria looked at Meg and said, I went to the barracks outside the city earlier to deliver some food to a regular customer. It's cold outside, so if you have something to say, let's talk inside. Meg opened the door and let the two in first. You two should have eaten already, right? Mag asked with a smile as he brewed a pot of hot tea and poured a cup for each of them. Hill smiled and said, We had a simple meal, but if Mr. Meg is willing to cook, my stomach is willing to bear a little more pressure. Before Gloria could say anything, her stomach began to grumble. She blushed. Earlier, after finishing her work, she had directly asked the coachman to come to Mamie's and didn't have time to eat. Today, she only had breakfast. Meg smiled and took a menu from the side and placed it between the two. That's good. I also haven't eaten yet. What would you like to eat? Order, it's my treat today. I'm joking. It's not a working day, so how can we trouble Mr. Meg to cook for us? Hill said with a smile. Meg looked at Gloria, who was about to refuse, and shook his head with a smile. No, you are worth it. Hill had contributed both money and effort to build a production line for the cannons as quickly as possible, which was a great help to him. Gloria had also made winter clothing for the frontline soldiers, which was also of great strategic importance in the cold northern region. Just these 2 points alone were enough for Meg to personally cook for them. Hill saw that Meg didn't seem to be joking, so he thought for a moment and said, Then I'll be blunt. I'll have a steak. Gloria thought for a moment and said, Then I'll have to trouble Mr. Meg to make me a plate of Yangzhou fried rice. She missed Mr. Meg's tofu pudding the most. But she didn't ask for too much of him to make such an excessive request.
All right.
Please have a seat. Mag turned and went into the kitchen. Teet teet, SSSS, TSS, TSSS. I heard that you've been busy preparing cotton-padded clothes for the soldiers? How's the preparation going? Hill asked first. Gloria shook her head slightly with a dejected expression and said, We are currently working overtime to rush the production, but the number of tailors is limited. With the current progress, it will be very difficult for all the soldiers to wear the new cotton-padded clothes before the battle. She had invited almost all the tailors in Chaos City. Most of them had volunteered, but the number was still limited. She came to Amy's today because she wanted to talk to Mr. Meg and see if he had any other ideas. The northern region is very cold. It's very different from Chaos City. If the soldiers don't have winter clothing, they'll get frostbite easily. Hill frowned. She had been busy with the cannons recently and didn't realize the seriousness of this problem.
Yes.
I've tried to get them from other places, but the Alliance Army is from different races, and winter clothing is very scarce. It's hard to get enough in a short time. Gloria nodded. In the kitchen, Meg was also deep in thought with a frown. Races with thick skin like orcs, demons, and trolls were still fine, but people with delicate bodies like humans would get frostbite if they didn't have winter clothing to protect them. However, war preparation was never something that could be done in a day or two. Everything happened so suddenly that the various races didn't have time to prepare a large number of winter clothing. After all, no race had considered fighting in the far north. Hill thought for a while, and suddenly, her eyes lit up. I've thought of an idea. What is it? Gloria looked at Hill expectantly. Tailor is a title that requires skills, so the number of tailors in Chaos City is limited. But if you lower the requirement to people who can sew cotton clothing, the number of tailors will become very significant. Hill smiled and said, You might not know, but in Chaos City, many poor people sew their own cotton clothing in winter. You're saying, let the people of Chaos City sew winter clothing for the soldiers?
Yes.
That's a great idea. Gloria's eyes lit up. She stood up immediately and shook Hill's hand excitedly. Thank you. No, it's nothing. Hill wasn't used to Gloria's enthusiasm. Gloria retracted her hand and blushed as she said, I'm sorry, I lost my composure a little. However, I have to go to the City Lord's castle right now and request for the City Lord to give the order for the residents of Chaos City to sew winter clothes for the soldiers.
With that, she was about to leave.
Wait a minute. Meg walked out of the kitchen with a plate of Yangzhou fried rice. He put his hand on Gloria's shoulder gently and said with a smile, even if you want to save the world, you have to fill your stomach first. If you're exhausted, no one can do it better than you. But Gloria smelled the tantalizing aroma of the Yangzhou fried rice, and her stomach began to growl uncontrollably. The strong sense of hunger made her eyes light up. Hurry up and eat. You'll probably be busy all night. Meg pushed Gloria back to her seat and put the spoon in her hand. Gloria's eyes were misty. She picked up the spoon and scooped a spoonful of fried rice into her mouth. A warm feeling filled her heart. The tiredness of the past few days seemed to be swept away, and her whole body was filled with happiness. Hill looked at Meg, and then at Gloria, and a look of understanding appeared on his face. You understand it again? Meg glanced at Hill's expression from the corner of his eye and raised his eyebrows. He turned and went into the kitchen. After a while, he came out with a medium-well steak. Thank you. I won't stand on ceremony. Hill nodded slightly. He picked up the knife and fork and began to eat elegantly. Actually, she didn't have time to eat dinner. The engineer had proposed a few improvements to the cannons, so she wanted to ask Meg for help. It would be great if the cannons could be improved a little. As for why she wanted to ask Meg, maybe it was a baseless superstition. Chapter 2152. Gloria quickly finished a plate of Yangzhou fried rice, and her dispirited state seemed to have recovered a lot. She rose to her feet, bowed to Mag and Shear, and said, "Thank you for your solution, Miss Shear, and for your hospitality, Mr. Mag. I'm in a hurry to get to the City Lord's castle, so I'll take my leave now."
Goodbye. Take care.
Meg stood up and opened the door for Gloria. He watched her get into the carriage and leave. Meg added more water of life to this plate of Yangzhou fried rice. He hoped that Gloria would be able to finish her work energetically. Meg closed the door and sat back at the table. Hill looked at him with a smile. Is the steak bad, or am I too beautiful? Meg picked up his Ruggiamo and continued to eat. He looked at Hill and asked. Hill smiled. I'm just curious. How did Mr. Meg know Gloria? And why did you choose to help her? Gloria is a regular customer. I have a good impression of people who frequent my business. I'll help if I can, Meg said calmly. I see. Hill cut the steak gracefully and smiled. It seems that I've missed a lot of things. I wonder if Mr. Meg is open for business tonight. Today is a rest day. This steak is already overtime. I'm not open for business tonight. Meg refused decisively. What a joke. As a man of principle, he would never bow down to evil forces easily. Besides, he had to consider the possibility that Irina might come home at any time. Miss Hill, what brings you here today? Meg asked. Hill wasn't someone who came to eat out of boredom. Hill put the last piece of steak into her mouth. She put down the knife and fork and wiped the corner of her mouth gracefully. Then she took out a folded piece of paper from her bag and unfolded it on the table. She smiled. I'd like to ask Mr. Meg to look at a drawing for me. Meg glanced at the blueprint and then at the Hill, who was looking at him with a smile. I don't think there's anyone in the world who understands this map better than Mr. Meg, right? Meg leaned back in his chair. Looking at this smart woman, he smiled. Let's lay our cards on the table. The cannon was indeed designed by me. The corners of Hill's mouth rose. Sure enough, her judgment was never wrong. But is this an improved version of the cannon? Meg picked up the blueprint. In addition to his published blueprint, there were 3 other versions of the blueprint. All of them had improvements to the cannons and shells. Hill nodded and said, Yes, this is the improvement made by our team of engineers after working for 2 days and 2 nights. The core is to add an array to the cannon, thereby significantly increasing the range and explosive power of the cannon. Meg's eyes lit up and he asked, "Have you tested it?" The first version has been tested. This is the comparison data. Hill took out another piece of paper from her bag and passed it to Meg. Meg looked at the experimental data carefully, and his eyes became brighter and brighter. After the magic cannon was added to the array, the range increased from 8 kilometers to 20 kilometers. The explosive power was also increased by several times, and the diameter of the crater increased by 3 times. Good job. Meg couldn't help but clap his hands in praise. Adding an array to the cannon was a very common way to increase the performance of a weapon on the Norland continent. However, Meg didn't have the knowledge in this area, so he could only provide an original version of the cannon. However, when this cannon fell into the hands of a group of top engineers and craftsmen, they came up with countless improvement plans. The array to increase the range of the bow and arrow was carved on the cannon, and it still provided a strong enhancement effect. After a simple first-tier explosion array was carved on the shell, the power of the shell was increased by several times. Meg put down the blueprint in his hand and asked Hill, "How's the stability?" The power was only one aspect of testing the quality of a weapon. The stability was another key. "That's why I came to look for you tonight." Hill shook his head. The improvement has increased the power of the cannon, but the instability of the explosion array makes it very easy for the cannon to explode. However, if we use a higher-tier array, the effectiveness will become very low. We can't solve this problem at the moment. I see. Meg frowned and pondered. Suddenly, his eyes lit up, and he said, "Can you get me a strengthened cannon, a batch of strengthened shells, and a batch of unstrengthened shells?" "Mr. Meg, have you thought of a way?" Hill's eyes lit up. "No, I have thought of someone who can solve this problem." Meg smiled mysteriously. "All right, I can arrange it immediately. Where should I send it?" Hill didn't ask much. "Send it directly to the city lord's castle. We'll go together." Meg stood up, put on his coat, and went out directly. Hill's efficiency was very high. A cannon and a batch of shells were sent to the city lord's castle in no time. Meg asked the people at the city lord's castle to greet Barbara and ask her to come out to see him. "Boss, why are you here?" Barbara came out of the city lord's castle with 2 blue ice crystals in her hands. She looked at the thick cannon next to Meg and the boxes of mysterious items and asked, "What's this?" "Barbara, isn't your master's an array formation master? I have a very important matter that I need his help with." Meg went straight to the point. Hill sized up Barbara. She knew Barbara's identity. She was the princess of the Moon Nation and had a noble status. It wasn't as if she didn't know that Barbara was working at Mamie Restaurant. However, that array formation master from the Moon Nation had successfully repaired the sealing spell formation outside Chaos City. Someone with such a noble status and great power would probably be rejected if they went to him directly to ask for his help, right? "Sure, boss.
Come with me."
Barbara nodded without hesitation. After informing Meg, she turned and went into the courtyard at the side. "Give me a moment," Mag said to Sheer, and then followed Barbara into the courtyard with a box of cannonballs in his hand. "Mr. Meg is indeed not an ordinary person." Hill raised her eyebrows as she became more and more curious about Meg. "Master, my boss is looking for you," Barbara said immediately after she entered the courtyard. Meg felt that this was pleasing to the ears. The boss and the teacher were of the same rank. "Oh, it's Mr. Meg. May I know what you're looking for me for?" Jonas came out to welcome him with a smile. He did not slight Meg at all because of his status. The king of the Moon Nation had reminded him many times to treat Mr. Meg as an honored guest of the Moon Nation. This was the person who saved the princess. Judging from his attitude, there was a chance. Meg knew what was going on. He did not beat around the bush and went straight to the point. He explained the importance of cannons and asked Jonas to help optimize the shells. "That's it." Jonas took out a shell from the box and tapped it gently with 2 fingers before putting it to his ear. "You're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.